it's a step beyond the budgie smugglers, really.
Right.
It does. It is like every good speech, though, long enough to cover the essentials, short enough to keep things interesting.
Thanks very much for that, Peter.
I live to
good.
give.
Yeah, you do. There you go. Right, I'm off to buy some Speedos or other budgies.
Sidekini.
Or one of those as well. Thank you very much indeed for your company this morning. Really good of you. Thank you so much for those messages about Keir Starmer and what the biggest threat is. When am I back? I think I'm back on Saturday. See you then. Kick-off is at 6 o'clock. Peter Cardwell is up next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Well, a very good morning. This is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company. There's lots to talk about this morning, and we've got a big interview with Wes Streeting, who is the Health Secretary. We'll talk to him in just a second. My colleague Phil Dave, in fact, spoke to him a little bit earlier on this morning. We've also got the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, is going to be joining us, as is the Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice. We'll talk about all the big issues that you want to talk about. In fact, one of the biggest ones is grooming gangs, rape gangs, paedophile gangs, whatever you want to call them. We put that to Wes Streeting. We'll talk to our other guests about that as well. And we're asking the question today about how far Starmer needs to go to deal with this. It's clearly a big issue, and a lot of people would rather that they minimised it and got rid of it now, and certainly not just getting rid of the gangs themselves, but the minimising the issue and perhaps not tackling it. We're also asking about how we get the NHS back on track. We're talking about net zero, a flight tax that will raise the cost of holidays as well. well, and fears of unrest as the Prime Minister considers open prisons for more offenders. What do you think about that? A lot of people will, of course, be dealing with the weather at the moment. There are runways that are closed. We're going to talk about the weather and indeed the travel in relation to that. We'll keep you right up to date between now and 1 o'clock. And also, if the weather's not enough to contend with, what about ballistic missiles? Apparently there's a hole in our defence system and we need to deal with that. Also, the Post Office, very interesting woman called Sasha Lawrence is going to talk to us a little bit later on. She's a former postmistress, and it's about the Post Office closing rural branches by stealth after the Horizon scandal. And just perhaps because we'll need a bit of a smile, a bit of light relief, we're going to talk to someone who does chaperoned dogs at weddings, just because weddings aren't chaotic enough. This is Rebecca, and guess what her surname is? I kid you not, McBride. Rebecca McBride of McBride and Groom is a dog wedding chaperone, and we will talk to her about that a little bit later on in the programme. As always, I want your views on everything that we're talking about today. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. There is lots to talk about. Be sure to get in touch, and thank you to everybody who has so far, including Kenny in Edinburgh. I'm going to read that out a little bit later on in the programme because it's not exactly germane to what we're talking about at the moment, but lots to talk about. And now we're going to talk to Matthew Goodwin Freeman and Scarlett Maguire. Scarlett is a former Labour advisor and Matthew is a political commentator. Hello, good to see you. Both great to be with you. Matthew, you're the big petition, of course, in regard to Sir Sadiq Khan. I'm afraid that wasn't too... it was very popular, but it didn't have the desired effect. Just tell us a little bit about that this week.
So, yeah, it gave people a voice, it gave people a chance. We hit 215,000 signatures, and what I was really proud of was the fact that support just came from everywhere. People had all different reasons why they were signing it, all different experiences in their life that, you know, they were struggling with as a result of the mayor. And no, it didn't stop the knighthood, but it gave him something to think about because he was asked by the press about it a number of times in the build-up to New Year's. So at least, unlike many Londoners, I'm living rent-free in Sadiq Khan's mind.
Scarlett is with us as well. Scarlett Maguire, former Labour advisor. Tell me, Scarlett, your thoughts on this plan for the NHS and whether Labour is really going to fundamentally change things. Do you think that's possible, or are they just saying, we're sorting out the NHS app? Clearly, there's a lot more than that. There's quite a number of different announcements, and we're going to hear from the Prime Minister as well tomorrow. In fact, we'll hear from the Health Secretary in a second. But Scarlett, what's your initial impression of what the government's been saying in the last couple of days?
Wes Streeting knows that he's got to sort out the NHS. Now, I mean, this can't be overnight. We know this, you know, it's like a great big aircraft carrier. It's going to take a long time to turn it round. But he knows that by the summer, he's got to have a lot of waiting lists lower. We've got to know that we're going in the right direction, and frankly, he is the man to do it. I mean, he is absolutely determined that he's going to sort out the NHS, and he's going to sort it out. First of all, there's the NHS app is great, will be great because people will actually be able to see their tests. I mean, I know because at University College Hospital London, if you're a cancer patient, you have all the tests. Every time you have a test, it's put on your app and you can read it yourself. It makes an incredible amount of difference to know what's going on, to be able to do it. But actually, he knows he's got to do more than that. He's got to change. He's got to bring down waiting lists. Yeah. He's got to make people feel that the NHS is working for them.
Well, let's hear from the man himself now. My colleague Phil Dave spoke to Wes Streeting a little bit earlier on this morning. This was in central London. Let's see what the Health Secretary had to say to Phil, and then we'll ask our friends on the debate desk, Matthew Goodwin Freeman and Scarlett Maguire, to react to it. I want you to react to it too. You can give us a call at any point during this pre-recorded interview as well, and we'll have those calls kind of lined up and different people's texts and tweets afterwards. Remember, the number is 0344 499 1000. Let's hear from Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary.
Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, you are announcing some new measures today, in particular changes to the NHS app. that will hopefully cut waiting times. Can you just explain a bit about what those measures are and what patients can look forward to?
Yeah, these are just part of the plan the Prime Minister's setting out tomorrow to cut NHS waiting times from around 18 months, where they are today, to 18 weeks, which is where they haven't been for more than a decade, but where patients need them to be to get seen on time. So this is a package of investment, but also reform and modernisation. So making sure that via the NHS app that people can choose and book their appointments. They're given a wide range of choice of hospitals to be treated at, to make sure that they can interact with the NHS with the ease and convenience we can, so many other aspects of our lives. It's also a way of reducing waste. We reckon we can get rid of many of the 1 million missed appointments that people don't turn up to because they don't get timely information in advance, still relying on letters that arrive after appointments, and also don't get the reminders that we often get if you book a appointment at a restaurant or a hairdresser. You'll get text messages in advance. Why aren't we doing these practical, simple things through the NHS? And there are so many other things as well, making sure that we incentivise GPs to keep people out of hospital and treat them in the community where that's appropriate, getting rid of some of the pointless outpatient appointments that people don't need. So there are a wide range of reforms we're putting in place, as well as the investment to deliver the shorter waiting times and higher patient satisfaction that we had under the last Labour government that's been squandered in the last 14 years.
Now, you mentioned about the offering patients more choice. I believe that they could be offered anything up to 5 hospitals to choose from. How feasible is that, given that many patients struggle to get treatment at just one hospital at the moment? And what happens if one of those hospitals is suddenly overly popular? How will you decide who ultimately gets to have their treatment there?
Well, this is both a principled and pragmatic approach. Principled because lots of people do exercise patient choice. The wealthy, the well-connected often know who to ask or where to go to find out where the shorter waiting times are, where the best consultant is. And of course, wealthier people, if the NHS can't see them on time, will opt to go private. With Labour, will fund people to go private so they don't have to, free at the point of use like they'd get on the NHS. So this is a way of giving patients real power, not making assumptions on behalf of patients about where they'd prefer to be treated. Some people, for example, might want to go to a hospital that might be further away from where they live, but closer to where relatives are who might look after them after they've had a hip replacement or a knee replacement. So this is about delivering faster access to treatment, shorter waiting times. It's also about making the NHS a more modern, reliable, easy, convenient service. Ease, convenience, these aren't words we would associate with the NHS today, in all honesty, but there's no reason why the NHS shouldn't be as easy, convenient to use as any of the other services that we use in our lives, particularly at the touch of a button on our smartphones.
Now, I'm keen to discuss the NHS a bit more, but it would be remiss not to mention, given the amount of coverage it's got in the past week, we have seen, obviously, that the grooming scandal, some might call it a national disgrace, never mind scandal, has obviously hit the news in the past few days, quite rightly so. What can you do as a government minister to reassure people that the government are taking what is coming to light seriously? What are you going to do to ultimately help those who have been affected by it? And really, can we actually trust the government to ultimately deal with it, given, obviously, the Prime Minister's former position and his sort of like the accusations he faces about the past?
Well, it is a national disgrace what happened with these grooming gangs and actually ongoing violence against women and girls in particular, paedophiles preying on our children. These are scandals and they need to be addressed. We had a national inquiry under the previous government led by Alexis Jay. Not a single one of those recommendations was implemented. We're going to implement those. There are other issues that were thrown up by investigations in places like Rotherham about the extent to which there was widespread corruption in the dishing out of taxi licences, and also the extent to which people were afraid to speak up for fear of being accused of racist or upsetting community cohesion. We can't have that. What I'd say about Keir Starmer is that as Director of Public Prosecutions, he opened up a lot of historic cases to go after people who thought they'd gotten away with it. He put in place specialist prosecutors so that we put rapists, sex offenders, paedophiles behind bars. Jess Phillips our victims minister, spent her life outside politics supporting victims of violence against women and girls to get their day in court and put rapists and paedophiles and sex offenders behind bars. So Keir Starmer and Jess Phillips are people who've banged up more rapists, sex offenders and paedophiles than any of their detractors. They are determined now to use their position of power in government to get even more offenders locked up, to keep women and girls and victims of violence and sexual violence safe and free from perpetrators of abuse. And we're going to make sure we get on with actually delivering recommendations which have been there for some years now, but now need to be implemented.
Do you believe the Prime Minister has unanswered questions, though, from his time as from the Department of Public Prosecution?
No, I don't. And look, we're happy to talk about Keir's record as Director of Public Prosecutions. He was praised at the time, by the way, even by Conservative ministers, for the way in which he went after this issue of violence against women and girls, the actions he took to go after some of the historic cases that had been laid to rest, and Keir reopened them to go after people, the focus he gave to putting in place specialist prosecutors to make sure that they could gather the evidence and put in place the strongest possible case to lock up people who beat their wives or rape women or abuse children. So I think he's got a strong record, but of course there is more to do, and there is more he can now do because he's the Prime Minister. Same with Jess Phillips. Lots she's done in her career tackling violence against women and girls outside politics. She came into politics and into this job in government because there's more she can now do because she's in government. So we want to get on with that. The Home Secretary is making violence against women and girls a priority. She has done for many years in opposition. Now she's the Home Secretary in government. She can also deliver real change, and that's what the government's focused on.
Speaking of real change, we've heard about reform to social care, and in particular Baroness Casey's obviously leading an independent commission based on the reforms that one wants to make to social care. But we're told that the final decisions won't really be heard until 2028. Is this just further proof that the government don't really care about the most vulnerable in society, that we've got to wait that long?
Quite the opposite. I mean, I think that would be a fair criticism if we weren't doing lots in the meantime. In the first 6 months, we have legislated within the first 100 days for fair pay agreements to tackle the workforce crisis in social care, delivered the biggest expansion of carers allowance since the 1970s in the budget. Just this week, I've announced £86 million of home adaptations for disabled people to put in place the changes to their homes to allow them to live independent lives. That's nearly 8,000 people are going to see those changes between now and April before there's another £86 million, £711 million in total to help disabled people over the next year alone. As for the Casey Commission, Louise Casey is one of Whitehall's best-known social reformers and doers. Her first report will actually be next year, which will set out the other measures we need to take throughout this Parliament, so over the next 3-4 years. As for the long term, I think what we're trying to do is break the cycle of broken politics on this. Every party has got its fair share of blame to take. Labour-led governments, Conservative, Lib Dem, SNP-led governments have all failed on social care. We want to break that cycle of broken politics, bring political parties together and see if we can build a national consensus around a national care service in the way that the Labour government did in 1948 around the National Health Service. So I feel optimistic. Really excited about the Commission, actually, but I want to reassure people that in the meantime, we've already started in the last 6 months. We're going to be doing a hell of a lot more in the next 12 months and more to come over the course of this Parliament ahead of the final report of the Casey Commission.
You mentioned the additional £86 million. There will be some who will hear that figure and then think, well, how is it possible that we have the £86 million this year and then the next year to help people adapt their homes accordingly, and yet we don't have the money for what many believe is the cruel axing of the winter fuel payments?
Well, it's because of the decisions the Chancellor took in the budget that we're able to invest in health and care services. And let's not forget, she did protect the winter fuel allowance for the poorest pensioners. She's put in place the warm homes discount to help people, particularly during the cold snap like the one that we're in. I would just say to people, there are unpopular decisions we've made in the last 6 months. We know they've been unpopular, and the reason we've been willing to take those unpopular decisions is we genuinely think they're the right decisions to get the country out of the massive hole it was left in and to tackle what are multiple crises. I mean, you know, you talk to me about the NHS crisis. If you had the Justice Secretary on, she'd talk about overcrowding prisons and court backlogs. If you had the Education Secretary on, she'd talk talk about a shortage of teachers and kids turning up to school too hungry to learn. If you had the Home Secretary on, she'd talk about the challenges because of policing cuts and wanting to put more perpetrators behind bars. So the challenges are enormous. They are going to take time to fix. We've hit the ground running in the last 6 months. There's a hell of a lot more coming in 2025. And we're making those decisions because we genuinely think they're the right decisions to get Britain back on track, reverse the decline we saw under the Conservatives. And we know ultimately people are going to judge us at the next election. Is the country better off than when Labour came into government? And we're doing everything we can to make sure that answer is a resounding yes.
Just finally, in the last month alone, we've seen what's being described as a quadrupling of influenza cases being admitted to NHS hospitals when we know full well the NHS is already at breaking point. What are you doing to try and combat that? How can you reassure people that not only this is nothing to do with the cuts to winter fuel payments, but actually it is going to happen regardless, and that ultimately you are going to get a grip on the situation? How can you reassure people?
Yeah, I mean, ahead of this winter, we went hell for leather on vaccination, and not just on flu and COVID, but also the new RSV vaccine as well. We've also made sure we've gone into this winter without the first time in 3 years without national strikes, so we got doctors on the front lines, not on the picket lines. When we came into government, the Chancellor released an immediate injection of cash during this year to support the NHS. But look, I'm not going to pretend that the situation we're seeing in hospitals at the moment is acceptable, that the ambulance delays are acceptable. I think people know it's going to take time to turn the NHS around, but what we're seeing at the moment in terms of those flu pressures, they are extraordinarily high. But what I would say as a health secretary is that annual winter pressures should not always mean an annual winter crisis. So one of the reasons I've been out and about in hospitals in the southwest, in South Yorkshire, in London and the northwest of England over Christmas is to see different hospitals in different parts of the country and start learning lessons now about what's going well and what's going wrong this winter, so I can start planning now for next winter so that year on year people see the NHS improving.
Wes Streeting, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
That was Phil Dave, my colleague, fellow presenter here on this session, talking to Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary there. Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000 is the number. Max in Warwickshire has been in touch and says, on waiting times, we already have the choice of 4 hospitals. You can't make that work. 1 would be helpful. So good luck with 5. Laughable Labour. Mark in Southampton, Streeting, talking about wealthier people, says it all. What's that got to do with the NHS? Sue in Cambridge says it's nothing new. You can already see your test results under your GP health record. Robert says, I've been getting reminders for the NHS about appointments when the Conservatives were in power. Jerry says most people who use the NHS are older people who might not have a mobile or a PC, so can't access the NHS app. Jane in the Milton Keynes says, regarding Wes Streeting, all I hear is blah, blah, blah. You'll just move the goalposts. Labour, not Labour, but Labour in Jane's view, were in power and opened the floodgates. Our country will never be the same. Ask your panel, a suggestion that I will ask the panel in a second, from Alison there. And Terry in Birmingham says Streeting ought to wash his mouth out. He talked about going private. Anyway, it's the same consultants, so they can't be in 2 places at once. And I do have the debate desk team today: Matthew Goodwin-Freeman and political commentator Scarlett Maguire. Scarlett, maybe I could start with you, actually. There's quite a lot in that interview. We'll talk about all of it. But particularly in regard to social care, Wes Streeting said they've hit the ground running. Do you think they have?
I think they're trying. I do think that one of the problems with social care was staffing. Is there were lots and lots of residential places. I mean, I think there were 100,000 vacancies in the country, and so it's really, really good that he's put the wages up to try and get people into that work, because you can't change social care until you have places where people can go, and that was the problem. Was for all sorts of reasons, places were closing down because they didn't have enough staff. So actually they have, but we really, really need Louise Casey, who's got a very, very good track record, to say how to sort it out.
But do we know already? I mean, we've had loads of different, I think there have been 7 different inquiries into all of this. And the thing with Louise Casey is that, Baroness Casey, I mean, she's a great record of delivery. I'm not saying she's not good to have a look at this, but surely what you say with someone of her skill set is you say, don't diagnose the problem, just get in, deliver, sort it out.
Yeah, well, I mean that's what she'll be talking to Wes about is about how to sort it out, and we know it's very complicated. And what we do know is that people always play politics with it. Is that we know that when it's how to pay. The biggest thing is how to pay for it.
Do you think, Matthew Goodwin Freeman? Do you think it's realistic to say that actually on social care there will be a national consensus, especially if Louise Casey is going to report in 2028 and then there's an election the next year? You're not going to have a load of politicians saying, yeah, do you know what, let's do a social care levy. That's a good idea.
Yeah, no, I mean, Wes Streeting said they hit the ground running. No, they didn't. They fell flat on their face. I know as a local councillor the pressures that local councils face.
You're a Conservative councillor.
I'm a councillor up in Harrow.
Yeah.
The pressures they face funding social care and funding adult social care, it is the majority of councils' budgets. So to be told that we are now going to have to wait until 2028 for the actual outcome, maybe some few nibbits next year, but 2028 for the outcome, the year before the election, meaning that they'll just fill up the Labour manifesto for being elected again, and then they'll actually get on and do it. That is a real red flag, and alarms are ringing, because that is not sustainable. And what a council is supposed to do over the next couple of years, as obviously we have an ageing population, we're going through, changes, what on earth are we supposed to do if we're told just hold on, money will come one day?
Well, the debate will continue on the debate desk with Scarlett Maguire and indeed with Matthew Goodwin Freeman in just a minute. We'll react to that Wes Streeting interview, and we're asking you the question about how we get the NHS back on track. Also some travel. Latest news, Manchester Airport's runways are now open. Liverpool John Lennon Airport, they've just reopened in the last few minutes as well. Hopefully things are getting a little bit better, a little bit back on track in terms of people moving around. We'll talk more about what Wes Streeting had to say to us. We also will hear from the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, and the Deputy Leader of Reform UK in not too long a time. Stay with us here on Talk.
Yeah, I think obviously climbing to the top of the rankings is going to be a goal that Luke will set himself over the next 12 months or so. There's a lot of major tournaments that we've got that Luke hasn't won yet. You know, he won the Premier League and the Grand Slam this year, but he hasn't won the World Match Play, and you know, the next major ones will be the World Masters and the UK Open that he'll have his sights set on. So, you know, Luke's got a world of opportunities in front of him, both on and off the oche. He's 17 years old. He could probably have a 40-year career as a professional dart player if he wants one.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Gary's been in touch and says it's all very well for Wes Streeting to look back at those days under the last Labour government when waiting times for the NHS were much shorter, but it's worth remembering that when Labour government got kicked out of office in 2010, they were borrowing the equivalent today of £230 billion a year. That's 50 billion more than the whole current NHS budget. Not anymore, actually. The NHS budget in England is now over 200 billion after the budget, but you were right until a couple of months ago. More the whole NHS budget, and a whopping 3 times as much as what the country borrowed in 2024. So what I want to know is how he's going to bring waiting lists down without bankrupting the country. Kevin says, listen to Wes Streeting regarding the NHS app reforms. I live in South Northumberland, and my trust does all this stuff already, and indeed have been doing it for a while. Well, that's great, Kevin. That's good. I suppose the point is to bring it right across England, and he is, of course, the Health Secretary for England. He also said doctors are on the front lines, not on the picket lines. A little bit more reaction from our debate desk people today. Matthew Goodwin-Freeman, your thoughts?
Well, that was really interesting because, yes, the doctors were on strikes, and this was one of the big things that the Conservative government was trying to deal with. The difference between what Labour have done since coming into government and what the Conservatives are doing is Labour just handed out the pay award. The Conservatives said, you're not having a pay award unless services increase as well. And that's obviously where the difference has been. Putting in requirements, putting in conditions for an improvement in service. That's what the Conservatives were trying to do.
But they failed to end those strikes, which went on, and surely Labour had no choice but just to say, look, OK, we're throwing a bit of money at the problem, we have to end these strikes.
There's always a choice. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and expecting a different result. We keep throwing money at the NHS thinking that'll fix it. It won't fix it. The NHS burns through £1 million every 4 minutes. That's millions and millions of pounds since we've been on. It's ridiculous. The NHS needs serious reform, not things that are going to take years and years to come up with a report that we already know the answers of because it's been done again and again and again. Enough is enough. We've got to sort this out. And Labour have a humongous majority. I'm not a Labour supporter, I'm a Conservative councillor, but I want them to sort this. And it's in the interest of everyone that Labour sort it. I'm fed up of people saying it's something in the future, it's something in the future. Deal with it now.
Speaking of the future, Scarlett Maguire, I mean, that is a big frustration, especially when it comes to a lot of these reforms, specifically social care. Louise Casey, Baroness Casey, is doing the review. She's not actually going to report until 2028. Do we know what the problems are now? Wes Streeting saying, oh, let's have a national conversation about health. Surely it's very clear what the problems are.
We know what the problems are, but for years and years we haven't sorted them out, and people have tried, and that's why. But I mean, to be fair on Louise Casey, she's going to do the first bit of the report next year. We know, as you've said, she's a deliverer. She wants to change things. So there'll be long-term things, and then there'll be short-term things, and the short-term things she will report back next year. And then we can do something. And in the meantime, as you say, I mean, Wes Streeting has said he's put the wages up so that actually to attract more people into the care sector. And as far as the doctors are concerned, we had to get them off the picket line. I mean, you know, they were absolutely crippling the NHS with these strikes. And what they said was that they had, during, you know, the after 2010, when public sector workers weren't given any weren't given pay rises. I mean, they were losing. I mean, we were losing. Not only were they on the picket line, they were going to Australia.
There's a lot of head nodding, head shaking, I should say, from Matthew Goodwin-Freeman.
Well, cripple the NHS and get a pay rise. I mean, really, it's ridiculous. The point of a doctor is to put the patients first. I completely understand them going on strike.
But their argument Matthew, their argument would be that they are putting the patients first, because if they're saying the conditions aren't right, they're not being or they're not being paid properly, they're not giving the conditions that are right, that's actually putting patients in jeopardy.
Well, tell that to people who now can't get appointments, are waiting at the back of a massive backlog caused by them going on strike, and accepting that actually conditions and quality of service have to go up if you're going to get a pay rise. You shouldn't just get a pay rise for no increase in improvement in service. It makes no sense. But, you know, cripple the NHS and get a pay rise.
hold on. You do not seem to understand how hard these doctors work. I mean, my consultant oncologist was not complaining about money. She said she was on her knees because of trying to deal with all the patients she was. They were working incredibly hard. There is a limit to what you can do with doctors. It's not like they were sitting around doing nothing, right? They were working incredibly hard, and they wanted a decent pay rise. They made no secret of that, and there wasn't a way of increasing them. They needed a pay rise. They wanted a pay rise. They were voting with their feet,
and they got a 22% pay rise in return. That's more than decent.
OK, Simon in Devon says the social care report will conclude thus. Council tax will increase dramatically to pay for it. That will be the conclusion. Labour know this already. Have saved them the time. Quote me on this in 2028, says Simon in Devon. Jane says the only way to save the NHS is to get rid of money-grabbing managers and have a matron in sole charge. We didn't have many problems back then when that was the case, but I do think hospitals are too big now. Leo says the NHS can stop letting foreign citizens use the service for free at free at the point of entry, and also if you don't have a national insurance number, you don't get to use any NHS service. One more before the break. Howard has been in touch and says when it comes to social care and lack of staff, they made staff that were doing the job choose a job or your job. People decided they would rather give up the job than take the job. They never mention that when it comes to shortages in staff. Howard, I do mention it, and I think that was an absolute disgrace. I've had my jobs. I'm happy to continue having the jobs because I'm immunosuppressed. My doctor tells me I should, but at the same time, people should have bodily autonomy. If they don't want to take a job previously, in the future, now, that's up to them. That is their decision, and I believe, as you do, Howard, that was an absolute disgrace that happened. People should be able to make their own decisions and not be forced to do things and have their job held over them, and there were, I think, 40,000 people who left the care service because of that. We're going to continue talking about all these issues about the NHS. Let us know your thoughts, 0344 499 1000. There's quite a lot of other issues around today, including a net zero flight tax that will raise the cost of holidays. Keir Starmer accused of snubbing a grooming gang whistleblower. We'll talk about grooming gangs, paedophile gangs, rape gangs, whatever you want to call them. We'll talk about that and indeed what Wes Streeting said in that interview with Matthew and with Scarlett on the debate desk here in just a moment.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Hello, sorry, we were discussing side keenies in the break there, as I was discussing with David Bill earlier on, but back to much more important topics, including the NHS, and a few of your messages, including Smithy, who says, Choose News has been available for over 10 years. Text reminders are already in use from my GP and the hospitals I'm under. This is the only thing he said that is actually relevant. Leslie says, when will Labour bring in an Islamophobia law? Will it prevent people from reporting grooming gangs? Really interesting, actually, on grooming gangs, rape gangs, paedophile gangs. I think I'm going to call them paedophile gangs, actually, because they are horrendous things. We've been talking about them quite a lot on Thursday, Friday, and on my show yesterday, and we're going to talk about it more as well today. There is, of course, I'm sorry, Chris Philp is actually just ringing me because I think we're due to speak to him in a second. I just want to communicate with the producer, Chris, there, to maybe give Chris Philp a ring back. Maybe he can chat to us now, I'm not sure, but we'll give him a ring back. It's probably best not that I don't take the call just at this exact moment. But certainly we heard from Wes Streeting on those gangs. We heard about Keir Starmer's record, and we have had many interventions this week, particularly from Elon Musk as well. And Wes Streeting there, just to remind you, he said they're a national disgrace. He says there is ongoing violence against women and girls, and he referenced the Alexis J report and said they're going to implement the recommendations. Now, we know that it's been 6 months and Labour hasn't implemented those recommendations. What did you make of what he said on that, Matthew Goodwin-Freeman?
It was really interesting, and also this is the thing everyone is talking about at the moment. This is the number one thing, and I was really interested when he said that there are questions for Keir Starmer to answer about his time as Director of Public Prosecutions. It's now been found that whilst he was leader of the opposition, he was asked to meet with victims and counsellors at the time who were urging him to expose new information and things that were coming out. In opposition, they, were happy to shout up for women and girls, and ever since they've come into government, it's sort of died away. And there is this question about the Islamophobia definition that Labour have talked about, but again, waiting for it. I think now would be the wrong time to bring something like that in, because it could shut off people wanting to come and whistleblow, and shut off people being able to come forward and say, this happened, I didn't have the confidence back then, I now do. And that's a real risk. We've got to make sure women and girls come first.
Scarlett, has the government got this right?
Yeah, I think what's really good, as Wes Streeting said, is that we've got Jess Phillips, whose whole background is on
but this
fighting
week,
against abusing women.
And I get that, and I she has been a strong advocate for that in opposition. Now she's in government, she's denied Oldham the chance to have its own independent inquiry. She says they should fund it themselves, said there's a national inquiry that she doesn't think should happen. What do you make of that?
Yeah, no, I think Oldham should look at. I think there should be an inquiry by Oldham about Oldham. But what's much more important is that actually the 20 recommendations from the Alexis J investigation, which was a public inquiry, was done by the government, took years to get started. Really good.
Okay.
None of them have been put in.
Well, Labour have had 6 months in order to do that. Scarlett, we'll come back to you.
I know, and the Tories had years.
Well, the Tories had 18 months. The Tories had 18 months. They did nothing, and that's what I'm going to ask Chris Philp about right now. He is the Shadow Home Secretary. Chris, thank you for joining me this morning. We're talking. You join us as we're. Hi there. We're just talking this morning, Chris Philp, in regard to that report by Professor Alexis J. We're talking about what Elon Musk has said this week about Jess Phillips and so on. The Conservatives had 18 months to implement the 20 recommendations from Alexis J's report about those paedophile gangs. They didn't do it. Now you're saying Labour should. Why didn't you do that when you were in the Home Office?
Well, Peter, good morning.
Good morning.
First of all, I think we did take a lot of action in government, going right back to the 2014 report into Rotherham. The independent inquiry into child sexual abuse you referred to was, of course, commissioned by a Conservative. Sajid Javid, who you and I know well, commissioned further research into it. And then, in response to that report you're referring to, Rishi Sunak established the Grooming Gangs Task Force about a year and a half ago, which led to over 550 arrests of suspected paedophiles. And in addition to that, mandated police forces to start collecting better data, as recommended by that report. And in fact, when the election was called last year, I was personally, as the Bill Minister, taking a bill through Parliament. And one of the things that bill did was create a new legal obligation on people in certain positions to report child sexual exploitation and abuse where they encountered it, which again was one of the recommendations. So I don't accept this point that the last government didn't act. They did, but those actions, to be honest, Peter, did not go far enough, because we've now heard in the last few days Simon Danchuk, the former Labour MP for Rochdale, telling us that the then Labour Party chair instructed him not to talk about the issue, to cover it up because of concerns about Muslim votes. We've had Oldham Council now formally, as a council, requesting a national inquiry, and I think it is disgraceful that the Labour government, that Jess Phillips, Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer are refusing to hold this national statutory inquiry.
You would hold it, would you? If you were Home Secretary, you'd say, right, let's do this, full public inquiry?
Yes, absolutely. No, it needs to be.
So why didn't you do it when you were in government? You had 14 years.
Well, we did. So, as I've already said, Peter, we did initiate the original Rotherham inquiry, the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse.
But if you feel so strongly about a public inquiry, why didn't you do that?
Well, and that latter one was, of course, a public inquiry, but we now need to go further, and it should be done immediately. And it is shocking that they're not doing it, the government, the Labour government. It should look into the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, including Keir Starmer's time as Director of Public Prosecutions, to make sure that he did what he was supposed to, because we don't know at the moment. It should look at the police. There are some examples.
He was praised by Conservatives. When he was Director of Public Prosecutions, he was praised by Conservatives for the job he did. Surely you're jumping on the bandwagon now against Keir Starmer.
Well, look, I mean, we need to find out the facts, right? I mean, he was praised based on what was known at the time, but we do need an inquiry to get properly into the bottom of what the CPS did. There are cases, I believe, the CPS rejected, dating back to that time. Police forces failed. On some occasions, they even arrested the fathers of girls that the dad was trying to rescue, and in some cases, even arrested the girl, the victim themselves. And let's not forget, we are talking about young, vulnerable, early teenage girls who were systemically and in an organised way gang raped over years or decades. There was a cover-up by some local councils, and we've got to get to the truth. And it is wrong that the Labour government is standing in the way of getting to the truth.
OK, I want to ask you now about social care and about the health service, because the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, has been speaking to the media, as you have this morning, saying that they're going to implement measures that would mean 1 million appointments are freed up, that they can get waiting lists down and so on. What do you make of those plans?
Well, I think what he is trying to do is continue the work that started under the last government with the community diagnostic centres that I've seen working in my own constituency in Croydon, in Purley Hospital, for example. So these community diagnostic centres and the faster referrals by GPs to testing, those have been happening already, and the fact the Labour government are continuing them, I think, is very welcome. What is alarming, however, is the fact that the Labour government, even though they promised to have plans for NHS reform, actually don't appear to have any plans at all. And when it comes to social care, they're kicking the can down the road until 2028, even though Wes Streeting promised before the election that Labour had a plan for social care.
You had 14 years to sort out social care. Why didn't you?
And we commissioned the Dillnott report, and in fact,
and then rejected it.
Hang on, Peter. The changes which the Dillnott report proposed, for example, the cap, the £86,000 cap on social care costs for families, was due to come into force in October of this year, October 2025. It was funded with £8.6 billion of funding over 2 years. And Wes Streeting, again, 2 weeks before the election, he promised that he would implement that plan, the Conservative plan, and then a couple of weeks later, it got cancelled. Again, Labour lied to the electorate in order to win an election, and once again, as with so many other things, broke their promises. And that's why the public feels so let down, and it's going to cost families and older people tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds extra because Labour broke their promise. And look, we are going to work constructively with this new commission because we are here to work in the national interest, but kicking the can down the road for 3 years, frankly, is not good enough. So we are going to be, I think, insisting on demanding a much, much faster timetable and asking the Labour Party to actually honour their election commitment and implement those Conservative changes that were due to start in October this year.
I know you've got other interviews to do. I just want to ask you one more question, and this is in regard to Britain being vulnerable to ballistic missile attacks. Holes in defence shown. This is a big investigation by the Sunday Times newspaper, saying that NATO is saying that we should have more contribution to our military, to the hardware that is there. I know there's a strategic defence review happening at the moment, but essentially the charge is that under 14 years of the Conservatives, that military hardware was run down, not replaced, and not enough money was spent on it.
Well, of course, we are exceeding at the moment our 2% of GDP defence expenditure target. We have two.
But when you strip out the nuclear deterrent, you're down to 1.6% of GDP.
Well, you can't strip out the nuclear deterrent, Peter. We're, along with France, we're the only Western European country to have a nuclear deterrent. You can't strip that out. It's a vital part of our nation's defences, and I strongly support maintaining that nuclear deterrent. We have 2 capable aircraft carriers. I think we're the only European country to have 2 aircraft carriers. So we've got a very capable military, but we do need to do more. And we are exceeding our 2% NATO target, but we need to do more. The Conservatives pledged in government to get defence expenditure up to 2.5% of GDP. That is a pledge that the new Labour government has not matched, and I think they should match it. They've got money. They've got £30 billion to spend on Ed Miliband's crazy plans to shut down our domestic energy industry. They should be spending that money not on Ed Miliband's crazy plans, but instead on making sure we're fixing social care, as we just discussed, that we're spending enough money on defence, that pensioners can have their winter fuel payments, that farmers are not under attack. Labour has their spending priorities back to front. They spent all this money on, inflation-busting pay rises for their trade union paymasters. Labour spending priorities are wrong. I think looking after pensioners, looking after farmers, looking after working people and the defence of our nation, those are the right priorities, not the ones that Labour are chasing.
Chris Philps, Shadow Home Secretary, thank you very much indeed for joining me on Talk this morning. Reaction to that from the debate desk in just a minute here on Talk.
Yeah, I think obviously climbing to the top of the rankings is going to be a goal that Luke will set himself over the next 12 months or so. There's a lot of major tournaments that we've got that Luke hasn't won yet. You know, he won the Premier League and the Grand Slam this year, but he hasn't won the World Match Play, and you know, the next major ones will be the World Masters and the UK Open that he'll have his sights set on. So, you know, Luke's got a world of opportunities in front of him, both on and off the hockey. He's 17 years old. He could probably have a 40-year career as a professional dart player if he wants one.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Well, it's all happening this morning. The Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp joining me a minute ago. Let's go to Scarlett Maguire and indeed Matthew Goodwin-Freeman on the debate desk for their reaction to that interview. Scarlett, your thoughts on what Chris Philp was saying there on any aspect? Let's talk, I suppose, first, as we've been discussing with each other on the paedophile gangs. What do you think about what he said?
I mean, I think he's right that the Conservatives did begin to look at it, but I think to say after the Alexis J commission that that not putting in any of the 20 recommendations was for Labour to do is just completely ridiculous.
They had 18 months, so there's no doubt about that. They had 18 months.
And I hear that at the moment Jess Phillips is actually implementing them. They're slightly, I mean, if you read
well, they haven't been implemented yet. She said in a statement, in fairness, on Thursday, Scarlett, that they were working at pace, they said, to implement them, but they haven't been implemented just yet. But my question is, if you, and I'd love to ask her, I asked her on this programme today, answer came there none, you know, if you want to implement those things, if you're Jess Phillips, right, and you're this, you know, I'm absolutely not going to take anything away from what she did in opposition. She spoke out. She said a lot of very, very undiplomatic things because she needed to about grooming gangs, about paedophile gangs, about violence against women and girls. She was a courageous defender of those people. There's no doubt about that. The question is, now she's in government. It's 6 months in, and if you're the Home Office as well, and you know Jess Phillips is going to come in, you know Labour are going to win the election. Surely you're ready to go from day one. Why is it 6 months and they still haven't pressed the button on these things?
Yeah. So if you look at the recommendations, actually, they're slightly complicated. They're about interagency working. They're about data. I mean, the point is that to actually get rid of the gangs is incredibly difficult, and it's about counsellors doing the proper thing. It's about the police doing the thing. It's about social workers.
What about the communities? What about the communities themselves? What about people standing up and saying this is not okay?
Yeah. No, and that's what we need. I mean, we need for the communities to be saying, because actually, I mean, one of the women have in the community stood up and said, yeah, you know, my husband went to jail for it, but actually at home he beat me and he raped me. I mean, there's no question that it's not that these men only pick on young white working class women. I mean, they actually they disregard women completely, and we've got to see how we can get particularly the women in those communities to be brave enough to come out and say, you know, enough is enough. This is what's been going on. And the men, I mean, a bit like actually the case in France, right, where actually the men collude together and only the women are going to break it.
Matthew?
Well, for me, time is of the essence. This is already decades old. We're already decades behind the curve on this. Time is of the essence, so we need to be getting on with this and get on with it quickly. That's what I want Labour to be doing. 6 months we've already had. Yes, completely appreciate Conservatives should have done more in those 18 months. Chris was talking about, obviously, the inquiries that the Conservatives did in 2014, and we're starting to get the ball rolling on the recommendations, but completely agree, not quick enough. But we've had 6 months of Labour with this massive majority. Let's get on with it. And also, time is of the essence. I mean, we talk about, you know, women feeling confident to come forward. They will come forward if they see the bad guys being locked up. They will come forward if they see that there is actually genuine justice being served. So we've got to get on with this. And people are talking about it, rightly so, bringing this up, saying it as it is, calling it out a spade, and that's what we need to be doing. We need to not be afraid to say it as it is. So, you know, I thought Chris did well there to explain, yes, what we'd done, but also the things that we had failed on, and now we're obviously not in government as a result.
Matthew, Scarlett, thank you both very much indeed. That's Matthew Goodwin-Freeman, political commentator and indeed Conservative councillor, as he's pointed out, and Scarlett Maguire, former Labour advisor, on the debate desk today. What do you think about what they said, what Chris Philp said, what Wes Streeting said? 0344 499 1000. Let me know your thoughts, particularly on the paedophile gangs, particularly on defence and indeed the NHS. Is this app going to save us all? Are the reforms that Labour are putting in, are they going to work? Neil says, listening to the conversation about defence, and whilst we spend more than 2% of GDP, did you know that includes pensions as well? So when you strip out the nuclear deterrent and the pensions, I suspect the real money is going into equipment is extremely low. I think Chris Philp was slightly misinterpreted me as if I was saying that we should get rid of our nuclear deterrent. I wasn't necessarily advocating that, although I do sometimes wonder what the point is. Leo says, yet again we hear those same old platitudes from Labour and those same old worn out cliches about how they need more time. Labour have already stagnated and flatlined the economy. Give them more time to do what exactly? Completely wreck the economy and this country, says Leo. Dan says, I don't think anyone is arguing that Starmer has a good record in conviction of rape and paedophile cases while he was chief prosecutor. It's these particular gangs of Pakistani men that he has failed on. Tony says the UK has zero defence against ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. That is a fact. Right across the EU, there's next to zero defence too. That's the reality. Sean in Gloucester says, a massive hole in Scarlett's argument about consultants being on their knees. How does more money change that? She also always tries to defend the indefensible. Becky in the Peak District says, great show. It's the public sector pension payments that is crippling the public purse. And Sharon in Wigan says, Wes said nothing new. They've been doing that choice of hospitals thing for years in Wigan. Still waiting lists are no better. And what happens when the young doctors want the same money as train drivers, says Sharon. Well, some of them will be paid more than the train drivers, but your point is certainly a good one in terms of those huge increases. We're going to put some of this to Richard Tice, the Deputy Leader of Reform UK. He is coming up next on Talk. We'll talk to him. If there's anything you think you want me to ask him or a reaction to his interview or the interviews we've heard already with Chris Philp and with Wes Streeting, you let me know. 0344 499 1000. Use the break to make the call. I want to get as many callers on as possible between now and 1 o'clock. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Well, a very good morning. This is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company. There's lots to talk about this morning. We're going to talk to Richard Tice, the Deputy Leader of Reform UK, in just a minute. We've already spoken to the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, and the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. Lots to talk about, including the NHS, how we sort it out. Is the plan the government is putting forward for reform actually going to work? We'll talk about paedophile gangs as well. That's something we've talked about every day since Thursday. Should there be a big national public inquiry? I'll ask Richard Tice that in just a second. Also, prison being open for more open prisons for more offenders. There's fears of unrest in that regard. Are we defended enough in this country from ballistic missiles? These are all the very big questions. To give us a little bit of light relief, we'll talk to someone who is a dog chaperone at weddings a little bit later on. Yes, really. Probably not going to ask Richard Tice about that one. We'll get to that, and of course we want your views as well. Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me at 7222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. There is a way to send me a voice note as well if you'd like to. Tech Up Dave will play them out. 0344 499 1000. You can use that number for a text message on WhatsApp, or just give me a ring as well. 0344 499 1000. Lots to talk about here on Talk. Well, let's get straight to it. Richard Tice MP is the Deputy Leader of Reform UK. Richard, good morning.
Very good morning to you, Peter. It's a busy weekend. Goodness me, the year has kicked off with one of the most horrific stories and scandals I think that any of us can remember in living memory. I think this child rape gang scandal, it's up there with the infected blood scandal. It's up there with the post office scandal. It's truly, truly horrific. Tens of thousands of white young girls being sexually exploited, raped, abused, violated. It just beggars belief how this has gone on, and the extent of the cover-up is, I think, particularly egregious over what appears to be decades. We just don't really know, Peter, is the honest answer.
It's clearly still ongoing. I spoke to someone yesterday, a very brave woman, Janet, who told me about her daughter almost she had a very, very narrow escape from some of the grooming gangs. We know that Oldham Council as well have made a request of government, of Jess Phillips, the Minister in the Home Office, to try to get an inquiry into what happened there. We've had inquiries in Telford previously. What is Reform UK's position on this? Do you think there should be individual inquiries into Oldham? Should there be a national public inquiry? What's the best solution here? Or should we just let it be, as Jess Phillips says, which I imagine is absolutely not your policy?
It's absolutely vital that we have a full, open, transparent, prompt public inquiry into what's gone on across what appears to be dozens and dozens of towns, primarily in the north of England, over, as I say, decades. And the idea that it could still be going on sends a shiver down my spine, frankly. But I fear that what you say is true. And we need this rapidly, and we need answers. And then, frankly, we may even need prosecutions. I think it beggars belief that Labour are refusing a public inquiry. As far as I'm concerned, I'd scrap the useless, wasteful COVID inquiry and redeploy the brains and the money to this. This is much more important.
It's interesting, though, you mentioned that, Richard, because I spoke to Tom Crowther, KC, recently. I think it was Friday I spoke to him, and he did the inquiry into Telford. And he said that actually, if you do a local inquiry, you get more out of it, because you can have you can essentially go and have a cup of tea with victims. You can go into their homes, you can talk to them, you can see what happened to them, you can talk and what happened, rather than having a very adversarial public inquiry, legalistic courtroom style thing that actually maybe doesn't work as well.
I think you could have the best of both worlds. So you could have a national inquiry, which could have satellite local inquiries, as you've just indicated there, eminently sensible. But what we've got to have is an investigation at the national level into who covered up what, when, how, why. Whether, the care workers, the police officers, the council workers, so many people, local politicians. It seems that many of them knew, and for many of them, because this didn't suit the sort of the lefty ambition of mass uncontrolled immigration, because it didn't suit the diversity agenda, then they were actually they were content essentially to smear and label these white young girls as just a problem to be ignored. And, I think we have to call it out. I'm very concerned that Labour politicians have viewed this as electorally uncomfortable and therefore best to sort of keep it.
Don't you think that Jess,
Richard, covered up?
Richard, don't you think Jess Phillips cares about this? She spent a lifetime. She worked in a domestic abuse shelter. Do you think she's been unfairly vilified over this?
I think that she's got to explain herself, frankly. She's looking at a very, very slim majority in her constituency, along with a number of other very senior Labour politicians. They are worried about the Muslim vote. They are worried about the pro-Gaza vote. That's the reality here, and it requires brave people like us Reform MPs to call this out as it is. If you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to worry about. And I just think we've got to do it because millions and millions of British citizens are raging, angry and furious about this. Just imagine, Peter, if this had been on the other side. Imagine if young white men had been carrying out these horrific attacks to young girls of an ethnic minority. The degree of outrage, you'd be hearing it from space, for heaven's sake. This is, I'm afraid to say, I'm gonna say it. This is it's a form of racism. What has gone on over many, many years, possibly decades, and I think we've just got to call it out. We've got to have this inquiry, and it feels to me, I know the general election is some years off, but this could well become a general election issue.
Yeah, I think it is.
Calling for an inquiry, well, Labour could be in real trouble.
Richard, I want to ask you as well about what Wes Streeting is saying, the Health Secretary is saying today about health reform, social care reform. He has said that there's going to be a report in 2028 about social care and what needs to be done. What's Reform's policy on this? How would you sort out the NHS? How would you sort out social care in this country?
Well, I'm actually, in a sense, delighted that during the election campaign, Wes Streeting copied elements of the Reform contract to use much more of the independent healthcare system in the UK in order to get waiting lists down. And he's gone a bit quiet on it recently, so some of what's been pre-briefed for what's going to be announced, I think, tomorrow, if it's delivered properly and promptly and efficiently, makes a great deal of sense. So let's wait and see. The idea, I've always said that as long as it's still free at the point of delivery, actually using in the independent healthcare system, the capacity of that would grow, that would bring the waiting list down. We've polled it. Most people don't care who actually provides the cure, who gets rid of the pain and the agony. They just want it gone and sorted. So there's strong elements to that if it actually works, if it's not just a soundbite. But with regard to social care, I'm surprised that Labour, having been around for so long and thought about this for so long, needed another 3 years to think about it. I'm not saying we've got all the answers on that at the moment. It's a difficult, thorny one in an economy and a country that is heading towards bankruptcy. So we've got to get the economy growing again, and then we can fix it. But fundamentally, healthcare in this country, including social care, needs root and branch reform. There's no shortage of money in healthcare in the UK. It's just the waste, the incompetence, the mismanagement that is causing the problems we've got. That's why competition's a good thing. Bring in the independent sector, the capacity will grow, waiting lists will come down, and customer feedback and experience will be much greater.
Tell me, Richard, as well, your thoughts on this big investigation in the Sunday Times newspaper. This is in regard to the Britain being vulnerable to ballistic missiles as holes in the defence of this nation have been revealed. There is an urge from NATO to significantly increase spending on air and missile defence. I think I'm right in saying that Reform UK doesn't have a dedicated defence spokesman in your parliamentary team. Is that correct?
Well, in a sense, we all speak about it because we're all so concerned about it. And when you're just five, in a sense, we all talk about a variety of issues. Okay. But we're the only political party in the general election with a clear commitment to get our defence spending, not to 2.5%, but to 3%. And we actually set out a timeline that we could do that in about 6 years. And I think that's what our American friends, the incoming Trump administration, want to hear. And we showed how you paid for it. And that's because we live, sadly, in a a much more dangerous world. And we've got to spend that money more wisely, more smartly in ensuring that the defence of the United Kingdom and our citizens is absolutely foremost. It's the greatest responsibility of any government.
Okay, Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform UK, thank you for joining me on Talk. I really appreciate your time. Thank you. Lots of people getting in touch. One of them is Abdul in Birmingham. He's given me a ring, 0344 499 1000. Abdul, I think it's these paedophile gangs that you want to talk about. Where do you think the fault lies? How do you think that people can try to deal with this, and how should the authorities deal with it?
To be honest, Mike, I think it's the failure of social services and the police force.
Why?
You know, these children are being denied, the national inquiry into this child abuse, and they should be. The existing government needs to get their acts right and do a national inquiry. Because it's going all over the country.
What about the communities themselves, Abdul? I don't want to make any assumptions, but I presume you're a Muslim. You're a Muslim from Birmingham.
I'm a Muslim myself, to be honest, but I know that, majority of Muslims are law-abiding citizens.
Of course.
I mean, they don't have any problems. But the problem is there are some bad apples, and they need to be addressed.
It's more than a few bad apples, though, Abdul, isn't it? And I wonder whether you have discussions within your community about what can be done about these gangs and about what they're doing and what the Muslim community should do about it, in your opinion.
To be honest, we had discussions on a number of different occasions with different professionals, and they're all insisting that these perpetrators should be punished, and if they're foreign nationals, their citizenship should be revoked and deported.
Why do you think it happens in Pakistani Muslim communities? I'm not asking you.
It's not all Muslims, you know.
No, of course, I'm not suggesting that for a second. I'm not suggesting that for a second, Abdul. But I'm just wondering why you think this is happening and why these gangs are predominantly Pakistani Muslims. Is there a cultural issue there?
I don't think so. They're just taking the advantage, aren't they, of these vulnerable children? Because most of the children who are being abused, they're either in care or they're living with broken families.
But why do you think it's Pakistani Muslim men?
Well, I can't really answer that question, to be honest. But like I said to you, they think it's easy for them to prey on these young children.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Abdul, what do you think? Do you think there needs to be a public inquiry? Do you think that's the right way, or should there be a more focused regional inquiries? What do you think?
Definitely. I think, this is what was recommended by public prosecutor Nazir Afzal. I knew him. I knew his brother who passed away, and he was a professional as well. So I knew Nazir Afzal's brother on a professional level. I mean, he recommended that as well, even though he had a lot of threats from some of the perpetrators. Do you think people are? Do you think people perhaps in the? I'm not asking you to speak for your whole community. Of course, I wouldn't do that. But I wonder if you think there is a reticence, if there is a people tiptoeing around this issue a little bit. You say you've had discussions in your community. You've talked to people. You've talked to professionals. Are there people worried about upsetting people about this, especially on racial grounds? Exactly. They're worried about repercussions. But the thing is, I personally think, the authority also need to liaise with the religious institutions, community leaders, and the scholars as well on this issue. Apart from the inquiry, they need to have some liaison. And what can those community leaders actually do themselves as well? I mean, have you had community leaders say? Have you had an imam from the mosque saying, look, this is going on. It's going on in Birmingham. It's going on across the UK and various towns and cities. Absolutely wrong. Don't support it. Don't do anything that helps it at all. No. Well, to be honest, as far as Birmingham is concerned, it's not that high, but it's all up in north. Oldham, Bradford, Keighley. There's certainly the big areas. Manchester, Blackburn. All those cities. Okay. And in Telford as well. Okay. I mean, which is part of West Midlands. But they need to be a full public inquiry. And like I said to you, I mean, the thing is, I think these people should be punished, and they should their national citizenship be revoked, and they should be deported. Because the thing is, to keeping them in the prison, as you probably know, is costing the taxpayers £15,000 per year.
Oh, far more like 50. More like 50 per place. Abdul, great to talk.
15.
No, it's more like about 50 for a prison place, Abdul. It really is a lot more than that. But listen, thank you. Appreciate that. That's Abdul in Birmingham there. If you want to add to what he has said on any of the issues, either grooming gangs, rape gangs, let's call them what they are, paedophile gangs, or anything else, let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. I can see the phones going there, which is great. Let me know your thoughts. We'll get the travel latest as well. A lot of people trying to get out and about today. Manchester Airport has reopened its runway. Liverpool's John Lennon Airport also reopened its runway, and I think Leeds Bradford is still closed. We'll get the latest on that from Simon Calder. We'll get the weather update as well from Joe Wheeler, my favourite meteorologist. Stay with us here on Talk.
You lucky people have got 4 of Talk's mightiest personalities in one room. I mean, what could go right? Me, Jeremy Kyle, Michael Graham, Julia, I'm Not Grumpy Tonight, Hartley Brewer and Kev O'Sullivan. Have you seen this?
Yeah.
What are you thinking? Jules is smiling.
I think they've made us all look a lot better than we actually look.
There
I know what to ask for next time I go to the hairdresser.
I'd like to talk about Jez's nipples on his...
You got nipples? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got nipples.
I don't know what to
I didn't think you had nipples. I assumed you just came in an egg.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Well, there's a lot happening today on the roads, rail and at the airports, perhaps not happening in the way that people would like it to happen. Let's check in with Simon Calder now. He's the travel correspondent of The Independent, the guru of all things travel in this country. Simon, what a day. My goodness, what is happening? I think Manchester Airport and Liverpool's John Lennon Airport have reopened. We'll talk to Simon in a second. We'll talk to Simon in a second, actually, because I think the weather has actually interfered with our connection to him. So let's talk to Jo Wheeler first, my favourite meteorologist. She is from Square Raindrop. Jo, what's happening? What's going to happen?
Well, obviously we had this area of rain, sleet and snow move in last night. It's been pushing its way northwards and it's been chased by milder air. So for some parts of the country, a little bit disappointing if you wanted to see the snow, that the mild air caught up. And we started this morning with temperatures -11 over Scotland and positive 13 down in the southwest. So there's your disparity. I was about on the border. I nipped out about 8:30 and temperatures were 2.5 and it's drizzly, horrible rain. So this is very much like Storm Bert. We've got a storm system running into cold air. That's likely to give some snow on its leading edge. And then that snow turns back to rain as the milder air catches up. And the one bit that caught everybody out last time was the amount of rain that followed on. So there are flood warnings across parts of the southwest and Wales. And that's for the rain that will continue through much of the day. But let's focus on the snow for a minute because that's lying across northern parts of England. You mentioned Bristol, Birmingham and Belfast airports having problems this morning. I believe the runway's been shut at Leeds since 9:30. Can't see that reopening. Many flights are cancelled, mostly to Ireland, but some of the others appear as if they're going to take off. Who knows? I'm sure Simon will have the latest on that. But that snow is going to continue, push its way up into southern, southeastern parts of Scotland, and then the whole lot's going to retreat its way eastwards. But as it does so, it's going to pull this cold air back in. So there is a risk that we'll see the rain turning back to snow on its back edge. So there's still the potential for some snow to come for parts of the Midlands mostly through the rest of this evening and overnight.
Jo, we were messaging earlier on and you mentioned a sort of fascinating thing about councils foisting heat pumps on people. Tell us what's happening in your area. I know it's not strictly relevant to the weather, but I just thought it was fascinating and I wanted you to tell me the story on air.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I obviously hear a lot on the news about people being encouraged to buy heat pumps and there are some subsidies from the government, you know, which will cover part of the cost, but they're still very expensive. And as somebody mentioned, the technology is probably not there yet for them to be perfect. But I was surprised to see a lot of work going on around me. And this was a council-sponsored initiative where they offer you a heat pump, solar panels, all new radiators, insulation, and this is for nothing. All you need...
I mean, how much would that actually cost if you went out to buy that?
Probably about 36,000 quid.
And they're offering it to you for free?
Yeah.
You going to take it?
No.
Okay, why not?
I don't trust the turn towards electricity at the moment because whilst you may say, well, it's a cleaner fuel, we still have to get it from somewhere. And I can't see that we've got the infrastructure. Sorry, I feel the same way about electric cars as well. Just my opinion. We are all oil here. We don't have any mains gas. So, I mean, on the surface, it seems like a great offer.
Yeah.
If I could have a switch installed, which would then switch between the heat pump and my oil tank, then I might be more inclined.
So it's about reliability, isn't it?
Yeah, the one thing that qualifies you for this is a long-term health condition. So when asked that question, I said, I'm sorry, not me and not anybody else in this house qualifies for that. And they said, well, hang on a second, has anybody got eczema?
What?
Did they have eczema? Did they have hay fever? Yeah.
Eczema qualifies you for 36 grand's worth of stuff?
Yeah. And basically, so I have low thyroid, and because I take medication for that, that qualifies me.
I'm almost speechless. I mean, that is wow.
Just a sign form from your doctor, and that's it. Bob's your uncle.
That's crazy. That is really crazy. Well, good for you for turning it down. Jo, fascinating story. Thank you very much. You always got a bit more than you bargain for with Jo Wheeler. She's always got something interesting to tell you, as well as the weather, of course, which is her profession, my favourite meteorologist. Simon Calder, back on the line, travel correspondent of The Independent. There were, I would imagine the snowy conditions interfered with our line there. Simon, great to have you with us. What's happening specifically with the airports, first of all, please?
Well, let's pick up from what Joe Wheeler was saying about Leeds Bradford Airport. That is closed at the moment. There haven't been any operations. There was one incoming flight from Romania which landed at Luton, not exactly convenient. And we've also got about 10 Aer Lingus flights to and from Belfast and Dublin connecting to Leeds Bradford. Those are all grounded. But what's happening at Leeds Bradford is far, far less damaging for thousands of travellers compared with what's been happening across the other side of the Pennines. Manchester Airport, well, they closed just after 6 o'clock this morning for 3 hours. And that was when there was an entire procession of flights coming in from Asia, from the Middle East, from North America, all hoping to land. And at the last count, well, we've had about 10 diversions to Birmingham Airport, some to Heathrow, some to Glasgow. If you're on one of those, well, I'm sorry that you've ended up in the wrong city, but at least you're in the UK, as opposed to the people who are in Dublin in Ireland, in Shannon in the west of Ireland. Those lucky people had just come back from Barbados. And there was also a flight from Toronto, which is currently in Paris. Now, all those people, of course, need to get back to Manchester, and some of them, the crews will be able to fly in time, but the Qatar Airways flight, for instance, from Doha, that sat on the ground at Birmingham, hoping there'd be a gap in the weather and they could fly in, but that flight's now being cancelled. And on top of that, of course, there are tens of thousands of people waiting to fly out of Manchester. We've had 36 cancellations so far on top of those diversions. And so I'm really sorry. The terminals must be heaving with people. And for them, I can't do anything other than say what air passenger rights are, which is that your airline's got to get you to your destination as soon as possible.
And that's the important thing to know about. Simon, thank you. That's Simon Calder there, travel correspondent at The Independent. Things not much better on the roads and railways as well. Let us know your thoughts on all of this. Maybe you're caught up in traffic at the moment and you're listening on your car radio. 0344 499 1000. I just want to get a number of messages. There's loads of messages coming in today, and thank you for them. You can send them in on WhatsApp 0344 499 1000. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can send me a voice note. Have we had any voice notes today already? I think we've had a couple. Yeah, Dave is working through them. He says, can you please keep them to less than a minute, because that just means we give everybody a fair chance to make sure we get them out on the air. Shane has been in touch and says, your last caller, Abdul, has shown exactly what's wrong with the Muslim community. To say it's not going on in Birmingham and only other parts of the UK is nonsense. I mean, in fairness, he didn't say it wasn't happening at all in Birmingham in terms of these rape gangs. He did say it was less a problem in Birmingham than other places, which I think is true. It is ignorant. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil comes to mind. There should be a national crime force set up to tackle this horrendous crime, and no, not engage with religious imams, but to tackle this crime and nothing else, no matter who it offends. Well, there is the National Crime Agency. That is its job, to sort out this stuff, and it doesn't appear to be doing its job particularly well in that regard. Peter, am I missing something, says this texter? Put somebody in overall charge and put high up people in charge of individual areas all together once a month, easy, then exchange ideas that are working. The definition of an inquiry, says this texter, to sweep something under the carpet. When you want something to go away, you call an inquiry, spend loads of money, take years doing it, and then do nothing. Why, oh why, do we always call for an inquiry? We know what's been going on. We've known for decades. A national inquiry and mass deportations now, says someone else, yet we are still letting all these illegals in and free to roam anywhere. Time to fight now. Back now, Peter, or this country will be lost. It's not just about illegal migrants, it's about people born in this country as well. There are people born in this country who are doing it. There are paedophiles who are of all ethnicities, of course, but Pakistani gangs are a major issue, and that's why we're talking about it. We'll continue to talk about it. We're not going to be silenced. This is the home of common sense and the home of free speech. And lots of other media did not do this story in any great depth. It's now day 4 we're talking about it. You still want to talk about it. I'm back on air at One Drive on Thursday and Friday, and on Saturday and Sunday next week in my usual slots. You want to talk about it then? That's all right, because they're my shows, but you're your shows too. We're going to take some calls on this in just a second. Maybe you want to get your call in too. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Let's hear a voice note now from Mark, who has sent this in. You can do this. You can send a voice note just on WhatsApp, same way you send a voice note to anybody else, 0344 499 1000. Keep them to less than a minute. We'll get as many of them on the show as we can. We're going to get some callers on in a second. Mark said this about what Scarlett Maguire was saying a little bit earlier on.
Hi, Peter. It's Mark in Lancashire. To be honest, I'm absolutely disgusted with Charlotte Maguire. She's immediately gone into the typical leftist strategy of minimising the whole paedophile gang problem by saying that these men rape their own wives as well, and they didn't just pick on white women. Particularly, she said women. They weren't women, they're children. They were 10, 11, 12 years old. They're not women. Don't minimise it by calling the victims women. They weren't.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark, for that. Judy in West Yorkshire.
Hello, it's Judy from Altos, West Yorkshire. I don't know what West Streeting's on about. It says people could receive texts and that about the appointments. They already do send them out. The doctor and the NHS sends texts to your phone to remind you of your appointment. And regarding knowing your test results, they already do that as well. They send the test results to the doctor and you will get a letter with your test results. I know because I have to have blood tests twice a year and I always receive my letter back. Usually at the same time as the GP receives what information, I suppose, is done through a computer. So all West Streeting's doing is reinventing the wheel. And the one way you could help the health service is having a hit squad go into a big hospital, find out who aren't bringing nothing to the table, all these managers that just attend meetings and nothing else, and implementing what they find in every hospital.
Thank you, Judy. I think the thing is that it may operate in some areas, but it doesn't seem to operate in all areas, and maybe that's part of it as well. But thank you nonetheless. Great thoughts there from Judy and from Mark as well. Scarlett Maguire had her say, Mark has had his say as well, and he's absolutely right. Those people who are being targeted by those rape gangs are children. They're not women, they are children. And they are paedophiles, they are rapists. It is a horrendous thing. Jackie in Manchester's giving me a ring about this, 0344 499 1000. Jackie, I think maybe you're not in Manchester, maybe you're in Oldham, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm an Oldham.
Greater Manchester, yeah.
We've lived with this for years, and I don't think people really understand the ramifications of what's happened in Oldham. We've had, I remember, I'm 58 now, and this was going on when I was 16. Not on the industrial scale that it's at now, but there was a problem then. It is organised crime. It is organised crime because there's been, in Oldham, there have been rape houses where residents have complained to the police, where taxi drivers are turning up to the house where they've got the victim. We've had people intimidated. We've had people run out of town. We've had people arrested for speaking out about this. And when people have protested about a review that Andy Vernon did, where only one victim was interviewed, they protested and the protesters got ASBOs. And this is why the people of Oldham don't trust the authorities to do a local inquiry. It's got to be taken out at the hands.
Even though that local inquiry, there would be guarantees of independence, as there were in Telford, for example. You just wouldn't trust it.
No. No, because there's just been cover-up after cover-up, Peter. And the thing is, these girls are getting trafficked all up and down the country as well. So it needs to be held at a national level.
What are where you're living in Oldham, what do you actually see day to day? Do you see these girls, or do you hear about it, you know about it? I just wonder what the community is trying to do about it. I mean, you've mentioned loads of things there in terms of people reporting this, trying to do something about it. I mean, why do you think, as someone who lives in Oldham, that nothing is happening?
Because I think that we've got a Labour council that has voted against having a public inquiry since 2011. They voted against, and it was only in the last elections where they lost overall control that the other councillors pushed to get this independent inquiry. So there's a lot going on with the votes, etc. for Labour. There's a lot going on. Do you think the Labour Party? I don't want to focus on Labour too much necessarily, although you're welcome to if you want to, Jackie. But do you agree that with some of the charges, including from Chris Filt, the Shadow Home Secretary, that Labour in areas like Oldham are looking over their shoulder and thinking, hold on, we're going to get voted out here if we target or at least even just look into the Pakistani Muslim community? Yeah. I mean, don't forget, the Labour Council employed the leader of the Rochdale rape gang to do welfare rights, and he was carrying on his trafficking and paedophile ring while this was going on. I mean, you couldn't make it up. Okay. Yeah, I know that is a matter of public record. I know that Jackie is on firm ground there. Jackie, listen, thanks for your thoughts on that. I really appreciate your giving me a ring on 0344 499 1000. We've had quite a lot of reaction to the Wes Streeting interview as well. Just want to play a couple more voice notes now. Kenneth has been in touch, and this is what he had to say.
Morning, Peter. I listened to this interview with Wes Streeting. It was more like, I'll ask you a question and then you just espouse everything that you want to do. I think it's absolutely awful what's going on. I'm not voting Labour, never have done, and I'm not voting Conservative anymore. I think the whole shambles of this country is down to both governments, and as far as Labour are concerned, well, he thinks it's going to get better when they've done a lot in 6 months. Yes, they just made things absolutely worse.
Thank you, Kenneth. Matt's been in touch too. This is what he has to say.
Peter, Matt in Hove here. Just watching the interview with Chris Philp. A Tory talking about kicking the can down the road. I mean, this guy's a clown. What a plonker.
Brief and to the point there. Thank you, Matt. Anna in Surrey also has some thoughts on the interview with Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary. We had that a bit earlier on in the programme. This is what Anna has to say.
Morning. Your NHS policy is ridiculous. You have too many people, not enough medics. It's that simple. Apps aren't going to change that. You are out of time, as are the Tory party. How dare you take the British people for fools? How dare you try to cower us? How dare you try to frighten us by putting our fellow citizens into prison for opinions? We will not be cowed. And how dare you pimp our children in the name of diversity? You're done. And I said this about the Tory party. You're both done. You've both taken the British people for fools, and we will not tolerate it. No more. Not our children.
Thanks very much, Anna. Remarks directed to Wes Streeting. There is obviously no suggestion that Wes Streeting himself has been involved in anything to do with rape gangs, but Anna's views there are, of course, strong opinions, and that's what we have on this programme. We are the home of common sense, we're the home of free speech, and we let everybody have their say. Alison says, should private medical subscriptions be tax deductible? This would encourage take-up and reduce the NHS burden. What's not to like, apart from political correctness? Great show, says Alison. Thank you to the person who says, Labour's solution to the wasteful, outdated and inefficient NHS is an app. Also, Labour can't talk about grooming gangs. The majority of where it's happened are Labour-run councils. That's where the problem is. Malcolm in Clitheroe says, an illegal asylum seeker gets to see the doctor or dentist in 15 minutes, paid for by the taxpayer. We talked about this yesterday on the programme a couple of times. Britons who have paid in all their lives are shoved to the back of the queue. How is this in any way defensible, says Malcolm. Joe in Salisbury says, what happens if an appointment normally available in my area is swooped in and taken from somewhere else in another area and I'm unable to travel? No priority to locals, and people can't access the apps Ash and Slough Please remind Scarlett Maguire that Labour was fully behind the sacking of the 40,000 care workers amongst the poorest paid and most valued people in society during COVID when they refused the bio-fascist vaccine mandate. It was estimated the same again jumped ship before they were pushed. This in turn led to ambulance delays when care packages were stopped through lack of care staff. Labour and Conservatives are to blame, says Ash in Slough, who also says Happy New Year, Cardi P. Thank you, Ash. Very kind, and Happy New Year to you as well. Bill in Romsey says reference to beds being blocked by patients who don't have a care package. Every hospital that has this problem, I should say, every hospital has this problem. May I suggest that every county builds a 300-bed care home just for the bed blockers? This would solve the problem. Good morning, Peter. At least pensioners won't freeze today with all the hot air coming from the politicians, says Dave in Aberdeen. Lots more to discuss, including a really interesting guest coming up next. Her name is Sasha Lawrence. She was a postmaster, and her husband was the postmaster. She worked in the post office, and she was absolutely screwed over by the post office, she would argue anyway, and we can talk to her about how that happened. Also, whether post offices are closing rural branches by stealth after the Horizon scandal is a big worry, and if you live in an area that doesn't have a post office, or post offices are closing, or indeed you're just worried about your own local post office, you're going to want to hear this interview. It's a really interesting human story from Sasha as well. She's been through absolute hell. Stay with us here on Talk.
Luke Littler is from Warrington, and his semi-final opponent was Stephen Bunting, who's from St Helens, so they're right next to each other. They know each other really well. They go back a long way, and it was a very good-natured semi-final. A lot of fist-bumping in between sets, which some fans don't like because actually it shows like,
they like
where's
the rivalry. They like the rivalry.
Yeah, but they go back such a long way, so there's a bit of criticism about that. But Luke Littler won 6-1. Tonight is the best of 13 sets, so it's the first of 7.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Thank you to everybody who has been in touch, including about Jo Wheeler and her heat pump. Jo Wheeler is one smart lady, says, May in Scotland, I am sticking with my gas boiler too, as the new builds nearby with heat pumps cannot get someone to fix them, and it's freezing here in Ayr. By the way, who is paying for the free offer? She was being offered us, the taxpayer. That's who. It's just an absolute scam, says May. Nicola in Norfolk, Jo Wheeler is brilliant. I totally agree with her regarding heat pumps. I do love Jo Wheeler. She is great. She is really good, and she always has something interesting to say. She's an expert in Madeleine McCann as well. She actually lived in Praia de Luge when the disappearance of Madeleine McCann happened. She's a real expert in that whole affair. Let's talk to Sasha Lawrence now. Now, Sasha used to work in a post office. Her husband was the postmaster, and it's a really, really quite interesting and pretty horrible story, actually, that she has to tell, because there is been some reporting about the fact that a lot of post offices are closing rural branches, perhaps by stealth, after the Horizon scandal. The post office, of course, denies that, but the conditions that our sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses actually are in hasn't really improved. In fact, in many ways, it's got a lot worse. Sasha, just tell us your story. Tell us what happened to your post office that you were running.
Good morning, Peter. Really good to speak to you.
Good morning.
I'm just going to go back to the question of stealth.
Sure.
This is all about the way they are paying postmasters. So postmasters and postmistresses across the country are being paid far less than the national living wage. And of course, with the cost of living, they are on their knees.
And those conditions have changed, haven't they, Sasha? The money that you were given previously, that's been cut.
Yeah, so that's true. So in June, July of 2022, the Post Office Limited introduced something called the MDA2, which was the Mail Distribution Agreement. So previously, we were paid fixed fees, and then without any consultancy at all, we were then moved on to a commission percentage payment. So when we purchased our shop, which had a fortress post office within it, and our house is also attached to that, we had built our business plan on the fact that we were being paid just over £21,000 per annum by the post office. July 2022 came along, and that suddenly slashed down to less than £13,500, which equated to us being paid somewhere between £5.65 and £6.50 per hour.
Obviously, a lot less than the minimum wage. Yeah.
A lot less. And then when you factor all the increased costs, doubling of insurance, tripling of energy, etc., and national living wage that we then had to pay to the staff to help run it. Our situation was further complicated because we actually purchased our property on April the 1st, 2021. And the joke was definitely on us, April Fool's Day. On April the 6th, after the bank holiday, we then took over the running of the shop and the post office. My partner, I then found upstairs, collapsed in a kind of Superman position on the floor 4 days later from critical aortic valve failure. He was nearly dead. He was barely conscious. And he was taken to hospital, and he ended up having open heart surgery. During that whole time, we had no support from the post office. They didn't provide us with any cover, which they were supposed to do. They gave us a complex process with applying for what they call, I've got the document in front of me, Sub-Postmaster's Sick Abscess Scheme claim.
So they were meant to help you. They were meant to help you in this very, very difficult, complex situation, a very, very difficult financial, organisational health situation, and they just didn't help.
They didn't help at all. I had to find cover myself. You have to pay more for that kind of cover. And I also had to then staff the shop, staff the post office as much as I could around that cover. It was hell. And of course, then you had the Horizon discrepancies. But Peter, it's really interesting. I've been listening to your show all morning, and I've been hearing about the paedophile rape gangs and the issues with our NHS. I also lived abroad for 23 years, so I have a bit of a different perspective from somebody who grew and worked only in, grew up in and worked only in the UK. I do think this is down to culture. And if you look at what's happened, I'm also a risk officer, so everything I do is very data evidence-based. And if you look at the evidence trail that's been supported by the Horizon inquiry, all of this started with the split of the post office and the Royal Mail. There was basically a corporate and political incompetency. Royal Mail was sold off, and there was no political business understanding from civil servants and Minister of in charge of Postal Affairs, and from the boardroom and the executives in the post office about what the post office function was. They were so focused on making it commercial. It is not a commercial enterprise. It is actually a socio-economic enterprise. And in terms of their failure to implement a governance, risk and compliance structure, they didn't have the policies and processes to support the organisational model. So we were a victim of that, but sub-postmasters across the country also a victim because they had no negotiation rights. That mail distribution agreement, which introduced the commission percentage payments, changing from the model of fixed fees, we didn't have anything enshrined into our contract, into law, which, you know, said that we could have a fixed element, or that the post office could change it from a fixed element. You know, we had no equal pay rates, prorated across the business. There's so much that could have been implemented right from the beginning.
And actually, in your case as well, I know that eventually when you had to close, because there was a time when you had sort of a hybrid post office and shop, as is often the case. There's one near me in my part of London as well, where one sort of subsidises the other to some degree. Then you were subsidising the post office. Then it wasn't commercially viable. And the local community, actually, you faced some tough times from them in regard to what you were doing, because it just was no longer commercially viable to have a post office in the area.
Yeah, absolutely. So at this point, I was working 112 hours a week, just to give you an idea of the stress that we were under. My partner,
as well as your husband being unwell.
Yeah, he developed what's called temporal lobe epilepsy, which is triggered. One of the triggers of that is stress. He was only working part-time at that point. We had done everything, I thought, according to informing the community as much as we possibly could. We told everybody what was happening. We presented to our parish council, and I actually literally presented the data. Look, this is what we're getting paid, and this is what's coming out. You know, the post office was running as a loss. As you have rightly pointed out, our shop, which we had built really, really well, because when we purchased it, it was quite a simple shop, and we expanded that, and we actually increased the revenue from the shop in the first year by over £60,000. But by the time the end of July came, with everything that was going on, I was like, why are we losing money? What's going on here? And I looked at the books and I talked to my accountant, and I suddenly realised we were hemorrhaging because we were subsidising the post office. And then we reached out to the post office. We activated a petition. We spoke to the post office many times, and they just said, well, there's nothing we can do for you. And then they said, well, why don't you go part-time? And I said, well, if we go part-time, you're probably going to slash our remuneration even more. Yeah. They said they wouldn't do that. And guess what? They did. Then they talked to us about maybe bringing the post office service out from the Fortress counter and putting it behind the till. And I said, well, what about safety? Where are we going to put the safe? You know, what about space? And they said, don't worry, we'll sort that out. We'll also help to fund that change, that transfer. And then I never heard from them ever again.
Sasha, you've been treated absolutely appallingly, and thank you for telling your story today. I really appreciate it. That's Sasha Lawrence there, is a former postmaster. I should say the post office said that the government sets a strict access criteria, that 95% of the country's rural population live within 3 miles of a post office. We have and continue to exceed that target, with over 5,000 branches located in rural areas. The post office spokesman continued, in many rural locations it's simply not feasible to have a full-time post office serving a small community. Our mobile van outreach branches are popular with many people. It also said that the drop and collect branches were primarily in urban areas. I mean, I just think it's appalling what happened to Sasha. She's had a really, really rough time, and unsurprisingly, she's not running a post office anymore. She's doing other things, and it sounds as if her life is better. Thank you to Ian, who says we do not need another inquiry into these Muslim rape gangs. We need an FBI-type criminal investigation and prosecutions. Well, the point is that the I totally agree with you, Ian, first and foremost. The point is that the National Crime Agency is meant to be Britain's FBI. Another person says, isn't Streeting's choice of hospital just a gimmick? Okay, I get his point that some might wish to be near family, but he sounds like an ambitious young salesman on commission. Leslie said, did I miss Wes Streeting telling us when GPs are back in surgery so we can get an appointment within days? After watching the Post Office inquiry, this person says, where all emails and documents from years ago were made available. No wonder Labour and others are against a public inquiry into grooming gangs, says Leslie. Listen, thank you for those messages. Do keep them coming in. Keep your calls coming in as well. 0344 499 1000. Maybe you want to respond to what Sasha was saying there as well. After the break, we're going to talk to Philip Ingram about how vulnerable Britain is to ballistic missiles. Holes in the defence, in our defence, have been shown. Also, fears of unrest as the Prime Minister considering open prison for more offenders. And the dog wedding chaperone. Fear not, Rebecca will be with us. What's her surname? McBride. Yes, really. Stay with us here on Talk. Loads more to discuss between now and 1 o'clock. Stay with us.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Well, a very good afternoon. This is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company. I'm here between now and 1 o'clock. And this week, if you want to know my movements, I'll be with Julia Hartley-Brewer doing Prime Minister Questions at about 12:30. As usual, on Wednesday, I watch it so you don't have to. On Thursday and Friday, I'm doing Drive between 4 and 7 and the usual weekend shows. So lots to do. And thank you so much to everybody who's been in touch today. Lots to talk about. In the next hour, we're going to continue talking about the paedophile gangs. We're also going to talk about Britain's vulnerability to ballistic ballistic missiles. Holes in our defence have been revealed. Big investigation in the Sunday Times. We'll also talk to David Shipley, prison reform advocate, about fears of unrest as the Prime Minister considers open prisons for more offenders. Clearly, the prison system is just in an absolute mess. And we will be talking to, I know you're looking forward to this, the dog wedding chaperone. So what do you do if you want a dog at your wedding? Well, you get Rebecca involved. Her name, Rebecca McBride. Her business is called McBride and Groom. Absolutely brilliant. I love a bit of nominative determinism. A bit of breaking news as well. Liverpool versus Manchester United is going ahead. The Premier League match will go ahead. It's been confirmed. There'll be some doubts about that because of the weather. So that is going ahead. Liverpool versus Man United, which is happening at Anfield. Full coverage, of course, on talkSPORT later on today. And make sure you get your call in about all the things that we're talking about, whether it is bringing a dog to your wedding or more important topics in regard to the ballistic missiles, in regard to grooming gangs. Let us know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. There is time between now and 1 o'clock. We'll get as many callers on the air as possible on that number, 0344 499 1000. You can text me at 72222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. Remember, you can send me a WhatsApp voice note, you can send me a WhatsApp text message, or you can give me a ring on the main number, 0344 499 1000. Let's take a couple of voice notes now. Linda has been in touch and she wants to make her feelings known about the inquiry into the paedophile gangs. This is what Linda has let me know. You can do this, just send me a voice note, same way you send a voice note to anybody else, to our main number, 0344 499 1000. Here's Linda.
Hi, Peter. In relation to the grooming gang scandal, I genuinely think that we need to have local inquiries because each different area, there's different issues, different services. I also think that it'll be more targeted. Also, from what I can think, I can't think of any big inquiry that we've had in the last 10 years that has actually made any difference. Ultimately, they just cost a lot of money, they take up a lot of time, and no prosecutions, if any, need to be brought, are ever brought, because they say we can't do it while the inquiry's ongoing. We can't implement this change while the inquiry's ongoing. So no, I really don't think we need a big national inquiry.
Linda, you speak a lot of sense. I've gone back and forward with this over the last few days. I honestly don't know what the best solution is, but I think those local inquiries. There's a really good interview I did with the lawyer who was the head of the Telford one, and if you look back on the programme on Friday, I think it was in the 5 o'clock hour, really interesting interview. I learned an awful lot from it. Very, very interesting. KC who did that inquiry, and he said that actually the local aspect of it, similar to what Linda was saying actually, is very, very important, and that is something that is fundamental to knowing what happens in the local area. But then there are cross-cutting issues, there's trafficking, there are all sorts of other areas. That was a Tom Crowther, KC, and if you look that up on the app or on the website, it's well worth looking at from Friday. Two more voice notes before we go to our discussion on defence. Let's hear what Claire has to say about Abdul's call a little bit earlier on.
Hello, Peter. Claire from the Wirral here. We need more Muslim men standing up and talking against these paedophile gangs, these Muslim paedophile gangs. Where are the imams? Where are the social services for children? Where are the children's charities standing up against this? I'm outraged, actually. And Jackie phoning, she said everything that was needed to know about Oldham. She's more informative than I am. She's more informed. Thank you.
Well, Claire, to be honest, you sound pretty informed yourself. You've come to some good conclusions there. You're asking some very, very good questions. Never do yourself down. Jackie was great. She is very, very good. You're pretty good too, actually, and your opinions are excellent, and thank you for them. You make an awful lot of sense, an awful lot of common sense. Final one on this from Kevin.
Hi, Peter. Kevin in Southampton. Starmer and his cronies have decided they want to support the Muslim rape gangs over the British people and our kids that were raped. Absolutely disgusting, Peter. I am disgusted, and like millions of other people in this country, it is an absolute outrage. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for your thoughts. We'll continue to talk about this if you want to get a call in on it between now and 1 o'clock when the show ends. 0344 499 1000. That's the number to call, or you can send me a voice note on that number as well through WhatsApp. I want to talk now about a big investigation, actually, in the Sunday Times newspaper about Britain being vulnerable to ballistic missiles. Holes in our defence system have been revealed. NATO demanding the UK increase spending because the fear is that cities and military outposts could be struck from anywhere, not just nearby, but anywhere within 15 years. Let's talk now to Philip Ingram, who's a former senior military intelligence officer. Philip, do the people talking to the Sunday Times have a point in this? Are we very vulnerable to ballistic missile attack?
Suggesting that there's something there. There's nothing there, effectively. And therefore, we are wide open to ballistic missile attack even today. And some of the new missiles that Vladimir Putin has used recently in Ukraine, the Oroshenk medium-range intercontinental ballistic missile, has got a range of up to 5,500 kilometres. It can hit parts of the UK.
Previously, I think I'm right in saying, excuse me, previously I think I'm right in saying that ballistic missiles, you often thought of them being armed with nuclear warheads, but yeah, that's not the case now.
It's not. They can be armed with nuclear warheads. They can be armed with conventional warheads. And of course, ballistic missiles don't have to be fired from a land-based system. They can be fired from submarines at sea. Now, most of the submarines at sea have got nuclear warheads on them, but it doesn't take much technology to swap that out. And what we're talking about here is land-based ballistic missile defence. The Royal Navy has got some capability on its ships, but those ships have to be in exactly the right place at the right time to be able to intercept a missile. And we're talking of from firing to it going bang. If it was fired from somewhere in Russia and hitting the UK, we're talking about 20 minutes. The RAF can't react to shoot it down in the same way that they could react to cruise missiles that would have to potentially fly over other NATO territories with missile defences on them. And therefore the UK is wide open. And of course our Atlantic flank is wide open should the Russians put a fleet in the Atlantic and decide to fly even cruise missiles over Ireland towards the UK.
How likely is that? How likely is that, do you think, Philip? I mean, obviously we've got to be protected, and defence of the realm is the number one priority of government. But has some calculation been made here thinking, right, look, if we're going to be attacked, it's probably going to be cyber warfare. It's probably not going to be a ballistic missile being flown towards a major city?
Well, you have to look at capability and intent, and you have to look at how long it takes you to defend against a particular capability. Do the Russians have the capability today? Yes. Do other actors have a capability that they're trying to develop that could affect us? Yes. Are the UK territories that are vulnerable today? Yes. From a Russian perspective, does Russia have the intent to attack UK today? No. But how long would it take us to develop an anti-ballistic missile capability should the Russian intent change? And we've seen Putin, and we've seen his unpredictability, and we've seen how he changes. It would take us 5 to 10 years to try and get our own capability, or if we bought off the shelf, it would take a couple of years to get something off the shelf. So this is not something where, all of a sudden, if the threat changes, we can go out and easily get something and put a defence around the UK and we're suddenly safe. And then we've got UK territories overseas, which the Times article mentions, in particular Cyprus, but we've got Gibraltar and we've got elsewhere. Cyprus is within ballistic missile range of Iran, of potentially what the Houthis are getting from Iran, because a lot of that is being backed up by Russian and Chinese technology. We have to wake up to this instability that there is in the world, and ballistic missiles form a part of it.
Why are we so far behind on this? Why aren't we where we should be? Is it just underfunding? Is it just money?
That's part of it, but it's because the threat changed at the end of the Cold War. During the Cold War, the threat was ballistic missiles hitting the UK, and we had fantastic, or we had a capability, land-based capability, the Bloodhound missile and others. The threat then dissipated, and with the wall coming down, we all thought that there wasn't going to be the threat of state-on-state war. Now that what's going on inside Europe, and with what's happening in the Middle East, and with what China's doing in Southeast Asia, that threat has gone from being far-fetched to being very real. And that hasn't kept up with the defence reviews, the investments we've seen in defence, the priorities that's been put in defence, not just for our ballistic missile defence, but for everything. And this is where the government we're in a catch-up scenario, but we have to do and start to work very, very quickly if we're going to have a capability that will properly deter anyone from wanting to attack us.
What's your instinct here? I mean, all of this would cost a colossal amount of money. Is there appetite from the government to do this? It doesn't strike me that there is, but I wonder from your perspective, Philip.
No, not in the slightest. From what I've heard inside the Ministry of Defence, the Strategic Defence Review that's going on at the moment recommended that there needed to be expenditure above 3% to start to bring defence back up to a basic capability. And that was sent back by the Treasury to the Ministry of Defence to say, no, show us a path towards 2.5%, but we're not saying exactly when that's going to be. And 2.5% is, given our procurement history, is nowhere near enough in what's going on. No, we're playing at defence at the minute, and we are at risk as a country.
Philip, as a former senior military intelligence officer, I know you can deal with an ambush. So I'm just going to put a point to you from Sarah, because I know I'm fairly sure the reaction I'm going to get, which would be similar to my own sentiments on this. Sarah says, regarding all your topics this morning, Peter, is anyone proud to be British anymore? Philip?
Well, yes, the UK is still a member of the Security Council of the United Nations, one of the P5. We're still one of the world's leading economies. The trouble is we tend to beat ourselves up. And I remember living in Germany for many years, and talking to the Germans, they're saying, and I'm not going to attempt a German accent here, but they kept saying, we don't need to try and attack the UK anymore in any way, shape or form. The UK spends all its time attacking itself, and therefore, we don't understand why you do this. I think we've got our national psyche wrong, and if we started to become proud to be British and started to be proud of our position in the world and started to look at our capability and look out and try and be positive instead of being negative in everything, then it would help enormously.
Philip, thank you very much indeed. Philip Ingram there, former senior military intelligence officer and proud British person, much like myself. Dan is in Kent and said Jess Phillips has no appetite to go any further with the Pakistani rape gang simply because she is concerned about her seat. Peter, Starmer needs to replace her straight away with somebody in a constituency that is not largely Muslim if he had any brains. Dan, just because you're cynical doesn't necessarily mean you're wrong. I would love to ask Jess Phillips about this. I've asked her over the last 4 days to come on this programme. I'm going to ask her again this week. This is a big, big issue. We heard from Wes Streeting, and in fairness to him, he did speak to us this morning. He gave us his views on the matter. But Jess Phillips has been pretty quiet over the last few days, and she's usually someone who's not short of an opinion or two. So we're going to ask again. I'm back on Thursday and Friday. In fact, you know what? I'm going to ask every day next week. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I'm going to ask for Jess Phillips and see if she will come on the programme, because you want answers from her. Dan wants answers. I want answers. And I as usual, I hope I'll do a sort of pretty reasonable interview, which is, civil and isn't just me shouting at someone and actually, listening as well as talking. But, we'll see. I really think there are questions for Jess Phillips. Dan's asked them, and I want to ask them too. Rob in Lincolnshire says Wes Streeting clearly does not know what goes on in his department. I had a heart attack in 2018, so my situation is monitored regularly. If I have a GP appointment, I will get at least 2 text message reminders, and hospital appointments up to 3 text message reminders. He is talking nonsense. Rob, I think you're right. I think the question is it's not everywhere in the UK, because I have a similar experience. I've not had as big health problems, but I do interact with the NHS pretty frequently, and I'm forever getting text messages from them. Les in Essex says if the migrants could pay £5,000 to come here, across the channel and get accommodation, food, heating, lighting, all free, then they can afford to pay for their own healthcare and take some pressure off our NHS. We will talk more about that. We'll also talk more about ballistic missiles and indeed fears of unrest as the Prime Minister considers open prisons for more offenders. That's the story we're going to talk about next with David Shipley. He's a prison reform advocate and former prisoner himself. Stay with us here on Talk.
since I first became aware of what we call grooming gangs, but I think rape gangs is a better description. In 2005, when I first learned about this horrific crime and how it has destroyed thousands and thousands of children's lives, I was horrified that nothing was being done. I worked on a case that was closed down by Greater Manchester Police, the official reason being because they would not put resources in. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Well, we know all about the crisis in the prisons, and we're going to talk about that in a second, but I just want to play one more voice note at this stage. Although keep them coming in, 0344 499 1000. We'll keep them playing them out, and keep your calls coming in as well on the same number, 0344 499 1000, between now and 1 o'clock. Let's hear from Rachel.
Hi, Peter. I think that there should be a public inquiry or something on a national level, because there's obviously similarities between these cases of grooming gangs. I don't want to call them grooming gangs, they're rape gangs, to be honest. And while they're at it, they could also investigate while the judiciary keep giving paedophiles and child sex offenders such light sentences. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Rachel, thanks for your opinion. Appreciate that. And people in prison is a big, big issue, and there are too many of them because the prisons can't cope. I'm not saying we should send fewer people to prison. I'm saying we should probably build more prisons or find a way to deal with them. And the government is now considering relaxing restrictions on inmates who can be sent to open prisons, despite warnings the move could actually increase violence, drug abuse and the potential for riots. Now, this was implemented by the Conservatives, expanded by Labour. Officials have already been accelerating moves from closed to open prisons in order to oversee overcrowding. This is a story in the Observer newspaper today. It said that more than 140 criminals absconded from the lowest security jails in England and Wales in just over 2 years, and that's an increase. And Mark Fairhurst, who's the national chairman of the Prison Officers Association, says if the plans are approved, it's inevitable violence will rise, drug abuse will rise, absconds will arise. The problem is that the open estate is supposed to be trusted conditions. They haven't got security, they haven't got the staff to deal with violence or trouble, so putting people with 5 years left into that world is going to destabilise it even further. Well, let's talk to someone who's been in prison and is now a reform advocate, David Shipley, who's with me now. David, thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Hi, Peter.
What do you make of this plan?
I mean, I think it's a good idea. I spent time in a closed prison and Wandsworth and in an open prison, Holsey Bay. And while in Wandsworth, I don't think any good reform or rehabilitation activity really happens. In Holsey Bay, lots of really good things did happen. I saw men who'd kind of essentially never had a job in their lives discover the habit and the value of honest work for honest pay. And that meant that they worked for years up until their release. And when they were released, they'd either been sending money home to support their families, so those family ties were strong, and they'd been able to, support their wife and kids, or they'd saved money so they could actually rent a property. I think they changed lives in such a good way that reduces future reoffending.
But what were their offences? Because your offence, I think, was financial. David, is that correct?
That's right.
I mean, you were not and never have been a violent offender. I'm not saying for a second what you did was right. You paid your debt to society. Now you are a prison reform advocate, and that's why we've got you on. But I mean, I think the worry is that people who have a violent past and are in for violent offences or have a propensity for violence, even if they're not in for a violent offence, will go to an open prison, and the whole character of open prisons will be changed. I mean, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, that would be bad. I think that is solvable, though. I mean, at the moment, if you look at the population of open prisons, they're mostly people like me who'd committed fraud offences, people who committed drug offences, and actually the other category of people you get in open prisons is life sentence prisoners. So people who often have committed murder, who have worked their way through the system, and the system likes them to spend some years at the end in an open prison to show that they are safe and can be trusted back in society. So that's the other part of the population there. We shouldn't be sending, kind of volatile, actively drug addicted or actively violent people to open prisons, of course. But there are lots of people in the closed estate who I think could be safely trusted in open prisons. A lot of financial crime. Actually, a lot of longer sentences are for things like high value drug dealing or that sort of thing, where these people are essentially business people who act in a dishonest business space. And I think many of those can and are be trusted in open conditions.
What is an open prison actually like? What are the main differences? I mean, we think we know what they are, but you've been in both a closed prison and an open prison. I've been in plenty of closed prisons. I used to work for the Ministry of Justice. I was in Belmarsh. I was in various other prisons. I've been to one in Camden in New Jersey, for example, which was all sort of bars and barbed wire and violent murders and things like that, as a journalist as well. I just wonder what it's actually like in an open prison, because I think most people have a pretty clear idea what a closed prison is like. We may have a less clear idea what an open prison is like.
Great question. So they are not like a prison. I found it very odd when I arrived there, having come from Wandsworth. They're mostly in this country in the middle of nowhere. So we put them out in rural areas, quite far from anything. And they generally don't have fences, or if they do, they're very small fences. So they're more like a military base. A low security military base.
Can you just walk out if you wanted to? You could just leave.
You could. In reality, you'll get caught really quickly. Because you're walking down a country lane in the middle of nowhere, and And I think there's a stat in this Observer piece about a high level of people absconding, and I think I don't want to diminish that, but in my experience, a lot of the guys who absconded were basically idiot 22-year-olds who heard that their girlfriend was seeing someone else and went home to argue with her. It's sort of, and it's obviously bad they've absconded, but these are not sort of serious criminals who are getting on a boat to flee the country. These are idiots who go home to have an argument and then get hauled back to closed conditions within a few days. It's not.
I've often travelled large distances to have an argument, David, it must be said. But yeah, sorry, continue.
Yeah, so I think but yes, you can walk out. I think there's this sort of strange tension that you have to. The prison kind of pretends it's not really a prison, and you kind of promise not to escape, and you have to respect the invisible walls and the invisible fences. But I think the upside is, because of that, they're much cheaper to run. You have fewer staff, and they're allowed to operate this thing called ROTL, release on temporary license, under which prisoners can go out each day to study in colleges or universities or to work in local employers and actually do something useful.
So your liberty is, in the sense that it is, your liberty is sort of taken away from you in the evenings and weekends.
Yeah, so if you've got ROTL and you're going out to work 5 or 6 days a week, you'll essentially wake up, probably have your breakfast and a coffee in the prison, leave, go to work all day, usually in prison transport, come back, have your dinner and go to bed. And people doing that are paying taxes, and they're paying an additional contribution to the Victim Surcharge Fund, and they're getting skills and the habit of work. So I think it's a very good thing.
There will be worries, of course, that as these things kind of liberalise and you have more people in the open prison estate rather than the closed prison estate, that there will be people who'll sort of slip through. I mean, what would you say to people who are genuinely worried about that, especially if they perhaps live near an open prison?
Yeah, I mean, it did happen sometimes when I was at Holsey Bay. There were a couple of guys who turned up who were just clearly not ready for open conditions. And one guy was put in a room next to me and sort of, was kind of getting himself drunk and wasted very quickly, shouting, and then when an officer came to tell him he couldn't do those things, he sort of ran past them and fled the site. And, I think there needs to be a sense.
They got him back, presumably.
Yeah, he was caught pretty quickly and then sent back to closed conditions, and then people who do that won't ever get to go to open conditions again. Mm-hmm. So I think the devil's always in the detail. You have to obviously not make sure that we aren't sending people who are a danger to the public and who are going to go out and cause issues into open conditions. But I said there are lots of people, probably 15 or 20,000 people in the prison estate who could be trusted in open conditions. At the moment, we put about 5,000 in open conditions.
OK. Thank you very much indeed. That's David Shipley there, who is a prison reform advocate. I appreciate him talking to us today. Leslie says, why is this government giving billions overseas for climate change, yet it will not commit to the defence of this country and its citizens? Betty has been in touch to say a 10-year programme of defence spending made in the UK would drive real growth and prospects for the UK. United States US, Australia, Poland, all spending big, buying the best kit built in their own country under licence. Regarding builds all the lost trades, and it gives real jobs in defence. More will build unity in the country, and a bullet doesn't discriminate, nor does a ballistic missile. Love, Betty. Thank you for that. Really appreciate that. Lots more to come. Be sure to get your call in between now and 1 o'clock. 0344 499 1000. We'll take a few calls next, so you can use the break and get your call in, and then we'll talk to you. That's as simple as that. Stay with us here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Simon is in Basingstoke and has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Simon, you're very welcome to the programme. I think it's Missile Defence you give me a ring on.
Yes, it is. I mean, I'm very concerned that I don't think what the current situation in the Russia-Ukraine war is being presented accurately to the British people.
A lot of people feel that way. What do you think we're not being told?
Well, we're not being told the number of desertions that are occurring. We're not being told the true facts about Russian advances. The Ukrainians have had built defences since 2014. Most of those defences have now fallen. And you can see from the cities that the Russians are now capturing, if you remember what Bakhmut looked like, it was a ruin. Now you're seeing cities being captured and they are largely intact. I think the Ukrainian army, which has fought magnificently with tremendous courage, is close to defeat and collapse, much the same way the German army was in 1918 during the 100 Days campaign, when literally troops would fire on replacements moving up to the front. So my question is, we're much more likely to see a NATO intervention because that's the only thing I can see that can save Ukraine now.
Many people feel, Simon, that NATO has almost already intervened, actually, or NATO countries. We were lied to and told that there weren't UK troops on the ground. Factually, there were. We now are giving £3 billion a year to Ukraine, and Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, says that will continue as long as is necessary. I just wonder, Simon, and I know we've spoken before, and I know you know your stuff on the military stuff. I mean, when Trump takes over, surely this changes. Surely there is some major change coming.
I think there is, but I think the Western powers have put too much political capital into Ukraine. We frankly could, after 2023, could not have won this war, because I mean, I'm amazed there is not more of an outcry about the fact that the US, all of NATO, and all the Western allies cannot match Russia's military productive capacity. And Russia has a fraction of the industrial capacity of China. So to even talk about fighting a modern war, which is decided by weapons, if you've got more weapons than the other side, you will win. That's why Germany lost in the war. They had more advanced weapons than us. They had jet fighters, they had better tanks, better artillery.
Well, they were really winning the war until about 1943, weren't they?
Exactly. So, I mean, my concern is our militaries are massively underinvested, but also they have very old weapons. The US Navy cannot even control access to the Red Sea. And the Russian Resnik missile, which used kinetic energy devices and hypersonic warheads, 2 of those would take out the 2 RAF airfields where there are actually fighter aircraft. The British Isles would be completely wide open. We have effectively no surface-to-air missiles. We have no capability to intercept ballistic missiles, let alone hypersonic missiles. We are sleepwalking into a war which we are guaranteed to lose.
Okay. Simon, thank you very, very much indeed for your call there. That's Simon in Basingstoke. He gave me a ring on 0344 499 1000. You can do the same thing, or you can send me a message on WhatsApp, which is what Dave has done here. He says, my reaction to the former prisoner, thinking that more prisoners should go to open prisons is a good idea, is, well, he wouldn't he? That is would be his opinions. More prisons is the only answer, and move to an open prison should be earned and not given routinely when nearing the end of a sentence. I don't think it is given routinely, Dave, and I don't think that's a proposal either, but certainly there are a lot of people that David Shipley, anyway, thinks could be moved to open prisons, and maybe we should expand them. Also, they're cheaper as well. And if the prisoners aren't going to be violent, if they're definitely not violent offenders, well, maybe it's not a bad idea, I don't know, and helps with rehabilitation, because, listen, if you are in prison, unless you're Rose West or Wayne Couzens or one of the, I think it's about 75 people who have whole life sentences, you're going to get out. And we need to ask the question as a society, what do those people do? Do they have jobs? Do they get housing? Do they become productive members of society, taxpayers, and go on the straight and narrow? Well, I'd love them all to. The fact is there is a lot of recidivism, and if you don't rehabilitate people in some way, well, then they're not going to become those productive members of society. And that, to me, which will save us all money, because they won't go back into prison and they'll be paying taxes rather than us paying as taxpayers about 50 grand a year to keep them in prison. And then when you get to young offenders centres, you're looking more at 150, 170,000 pounds a year. It's a big debate. If you want to have it, between now and 1, I'm more than happy to talk to you, 0344 499 1000. But now, I am more than happy to talk to Nick Ellerby, who is one of our reporters. Nick, it has been quite the busy day on a number of different fronts. What we do know now is that Liverpool versus Man United is to go ahead, much to the happiness of many supporters of both teams. The Premier League match will go ahead at Anfield. It's been confirmed. But for a lot of people, in regard to the weather, travel, just bring us completely up to date with what's happening. Give us the news you can use.
In terms of the sport, or are you talking about the weather, whole weather in general?
Tell us the whole thing. You know everything.
I have been across all of it today. So in terms of the weather, we've seen those. You know, the UK is under quite a rare amber health alert. You know, we're hearing the government are sort of saying we should be checking in on relatives, vulnerable people, make sure the heating's on. Tonight's going to be another freezing night. We've had heavy snow, especially across the Midlands and the north of England into southern Scotland overnight. And again, more snow is expected this afternoon, up to 25 centimetres across parts of the north of England later. They're saying rural communities could be cut off. I understand that most of Ireland is unaffected. Northern Ireland's been lots of power cuts. They're working hard to get power back on there. In terms of travel, we've seen Manchester Airport, Liverpool Airport have just reopened runways. Manchester Airport actually closed both runways. That hadn't happened for 2 years. So big knock-on effects expected. When you get these intercontinental planes sort of being shunted around in terms of the timetable, you're going to see, you know...
They're going to be in the wrong places, aren't they?
Exactly, yeah. And then that's going to run on this afternoon into tomorrow. go. Leeds-Bradford is still closed as well. So really, a lot of travel disruption. And then in terms of the roads, it's sort of the Peak District, Cumbria, potentially the worst places affected. People are being asked, just take a bit of extra care. I actually saw just now that the police in Newport, Wales is quite badly affected, seized 2 cars because some people were drifting round corners, apparently for fun. So police there are saying, look, it's not allowed, it's illegal to do that in England, and actually, stop messing about and just make sure you're being safe. In terms of the sport, we were worried that big game in the Premier League, Liverpool versus Man United, was going to be called off. There was a pitch inspection at Anfield in Liverpool at 9, and then they said we're going to wait until midday, so we're all a bit nervous over at talkSPORT. But the game is on as planned at 4:30. Apparently all the arterial routes around Liverpool are okay. It's sort of those smaller roads when you get into the city, in the car parks and around the grounds, that our reporters said, it's like when you put your foot on the accelerator, you feel, actually, is my car safe here? Yeah. So people are just being asked to take extra care. There are 3 games in League 2 that have already been called off in Wales, the Midlands and the north of England, but all the games in Scotland are on. And at 2 o'clock we've got Fulham versus Ipswich as well, so 2 Premier League games today, and that'll all be covered over on talkSPORT and then here later on this afternoon.
Nick, I have a very important question for you. I don't think you have perhaps been asked this question on broadcast before. Do you own a side kini?
What is a side kini?
Oh, you see, you don't know.
It's not like that Borat thing.
No, that's different. That's different. That's a mankini. A side kini is... It just goes off to the side, shall we say. I was discussing it with David Bill earlier. I just thought you might have one. Kenny in Edinburgh has been in touch and says, hi, Cardi.
I still don't know what it is.
Well, you're going to have to Google it. Hi, don't do it on a work computer would be my strong advice.
Right,
Kenny in Edinburgh has been in touch and says, hi, Cardi P. Please, 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 for the love of God, do not wear a side kini or a pair of budgie smugglers. They're making a return, apparently.
Yeah.
You and Kevin O'Sullivan are my favourite talk
I've got some budgie smugglers.
Do you? Okay, right. You and Kevin O'Sullivan are my favourite talk presenters, but you can no longer claim to be nearly as cool as me if you wore any of them. So there we are.
Oh, hang on, I just got a picture of this. Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're not going to put this on the screen.
It doesn't leave much to the imagination,
does it? Very little.
Your kind producer just showed me a picture of a side kini.
Is he kind?
No way would I ever
budgie smugglers or side kini, what would your choice be?
No, definitely, the budgie smugglers are all right. I mean, there's an Australian company called Budgie Smuggler that's actually, they're flying off the shelves at the moment. You could order...
Cheap.
You could order, put your own photos on it, so you get... your face on some budgie smugglers.
My face on budgie smugglers? Yeah. Your face on budgie smugglers?
Well, I mean, people can do what they want.
Okay. A lot to think about there. Thank you very much indeed, Nick Ellerby,
pause for thought.
giving us a lot of thought on budgie smugglers, side kinis, and giving us a travel and weather update. So appreciate Nick Ellerby, reporter there for us. Lots to discuss, a couple more calls after the break, and we will be talking to, I'm really looking forward to this. Actually, Nick, are you married? I can't remember. You are married, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. There's the wedding ring. Would you have a dog at your wedding?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Did you have a dog at your wedding?
No, I got married during COVID, so there was hardly any people there.
You were barely there.
Yeah.
We're going to talk to someone who's a dog wedding chaperone in a minute.
I like it when the dogs bring the rings in.
Yeah, well, that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Do you know what her name is? Rebecca McBride.
Well, nominative determinism.
That's right, yeah. McBride and groom dog wedding chaperones. So we're going to talk to her in a second and take a couple of calls. Thank you to Nick Ellerby. Stay with us here on Talk.
since I first became aware of what we call grooming gangs, but I think rape gangs is a better description. In 2005, when I first learned about this horrific crime and how it has destroyed thousands and thousands of children's lives, I was horrified that nothing was being done. I worked on a case that was closed down by Greater Manchester Police, the official reason being because they would not put resources in. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Dave is in Staffordshire and has given me a ring about paedophile gangs. 0344 499 1000. Dave, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
I didn't realise it'd be this quick. No, I don't know. I mean, there's been scandals over the years anyway, but I don't know. I mean, obviously it's only a theory, but there's either too many people involved in it, or they're just incompetent. I remember, was it Grenfell Tower? All the local councillors at the time, I think they all resigned soon after, so they wouldn't be criticised or sacked anyway. I don't know. It's either incompetence or there's too many people involved.
I wonder if it's a bit of both, actually, because I don't really, believe in conspiracy theories necessarily, but there's absolutely no doubt that I'm not saying you're a conspiracy theorist, Dave. I'm not saying that for a second.
No, I'm not at all. But I mean, we all think about things. I mean, I spent 20 years working for the ambulance service, and in them 20 years, I only ever met 3 members of the mental health crisis team.
Right.
I think I only ever met 1 or 2 social workers.
Yeah.
And it always seems to be. I mean, I know a lot of these people are underfunded and whatever, but they always seem to be if they couldn't do anything, they always seemed to be the first thing to be was pass the buck on to somebody else.
Yeah, no, that's part of it as well. And I just wonder, I've spoken to loads of people about this, and people say, it's there's just got to be a really, really straightforward thing that we say in society, this is illegal, you shouldn't do it. Anybody who turns a blind eye to this, anybody who knows it's going on doesn't speak up. This idea of a duty to report...
It's either that, but it's always easier to do nothing, isn't it?
Yeah, no, indeed, and just say, well, someone else will do something about it, and often that's just not the case.
Yeah, like I say, pass the book,
Yeah.
It's like, I know, as I said before, I worked for the ambulance service, but, we used to have a direct line to, like, the 111, and you'd phone them, and you'd wait for a call back, and you wouldn't get it, or, like, the mental health crisis team, or any other they just if they couldn't do anything, they just say, well, just take them to A&E and let them deal with it.
Yes, I know what you mean. Yeah, listen, thank you very much indeed, Dave. That's Dave in Staffordshire there. Thanks to Derek, who says the country is broken. We need to put our house in order. Stop immigration, which is bleeding the country dry. Next, benefits. This is bleeding the country, which we can't have. Millions living off the state unless we deal with these 2 main problems. Nothing else matters. Or goodbye, Britain. Kelvin says we don't need more prisons. We need bigger sentences for violent crime. 60 years for committing violent crime. Get caught carrying a knife or a gun, the same. Then there are fewer offences, 20 years, and stick it to them. Crime will stop overnight. This is what they should be looking at now, and their families pay for the upkeep in prison too. That's Kelvin in Macclesfield. And Robert in Hertfordshire has some thoughts on prisons as well. Robert, you're very welcome to the programme. What are your thoughts?
Well, a lot of my friends are professional criminals. They move in them circles, and some of them are, quite heavy criminals. They said to me, this is a delicate matter, but the truth of it is that Muslims are now running the prisons. Now, you would not read about that in the newspapers because it won't get in the newspapers. But this is coming from the horse's mouth. And you've got people like Levi Belfield who have turned to Islam for protection. So what happens is that when you're a prisoner and you may be vulnerable, you're approached by these gangs who offer protection if you convert
to Islam.
Yeah, no, this is true. You know, this is coming from hardened criminals, bank robbers.
Listen, I worked for the Ministry of Justice. I know this is true. I know what you're saying is true. And I know as well that there are, when it comes to, I'm not talking about people who just simply change their faith. I mean, that's fine. I'm talking about people who are radicalised to Islamism, radical Islam, which is terror related. And this happens in prison. And sometimes people go in and they're not terrorists, they're not radicalised, they're not Islamists, and they come out and they are. And that sounds as if that's happening from what your mate is telling you.
See, when you go into prison, sometimes you know people. So we call it you're looked after.
Yeah.
You know, you're looked after in there. But a lot of people who go in prison, they don't know anybody. They're absolutely terrified. Mm-hmm. And they're approached, they're vulnerable, and they're approached. And I mean, that's true that Levi Belfield has turned to Islam. He's got an Islamic name now. I mean, he's just one of dozens of them. But I'd like to thank you on the points that you said earlier about, you know, I don't think the government, with the grooming gangs, I don't think the government should take full responsibility. That's including the Tories. This all goes on local councils. Now, the thing is...
It goes on the community as well, does it not, Robert? Because there are people who are turning a blind eye to this. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, but every council where this has happened is probably Labour controlled. Now, we
don't know. I don't know that's necessarily the case, but certainly we have places like Telford, for example, where they did do a good local inquiry and some stuff did change, but there's so much more to do, Robert, isn't there?
Well, there's one word that's got us in this trouble, and that's tolerance. Tolerance, it's the word of tolerance, and we're being, you know, the word is abused. Everybody's frightened to upset Islam, and you know, I've got some Muslim friends, but there is a real problem, and I think this will actually overshadow the migrant crisis.
Okay.
This is big, and you've got a Prime Minister who, thanks to the Prime Minister, when he let a paedophile run riot around the BBC. You know, when he was... so not much hope there with him doing anything.
I think you're referring to Jimmy Savile there, yeah. Robert, listen, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts. It's Robert in Hertfordshire having a say on 0344 499 1000. Thanks to a texter from Northern Ireland who says the power cuts are in the Republic, the power cuts that Nick Ellerby was talking about, they're actually not in Northern Ireland. So Republic of Ireland is experiencing some power cuts there. Let's talk now about McBride and Groom. Honestly, this is amazing. It is a company based in County Down in Northern Ireland. It provides a premium dog chaperone and pet sitting service across Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And the question is, if you want your dog to come to your wedding, who looks after it? They say never work with animals or children, but Rebecca McBride, yes, honestly, that is her surname, of McBride and Groom. Brilliant. Rebecca, tell us about what you do. I mean, it just sounds like fun, but also tiny bit stressful, perhaps, with a few maybe bridezillas or mothers-in-law, or indeed groomzillas who are telling you to keep the dog under control. Tell us about what you do.
I know, no, it is a very fun job, but obviously taking a dog to a wedding, you have to be quite careful in what you're doing. So usually all of the family are so happy to see the dog arrive. So basically, I usually pick the dog up in the morning when everyone's getting ready for the wedding, take it for a big walk, and then I head over to the ceremony with the dog. So we meet the bride and groom, or the bride and bride, before they're getting married. And basically, they get to say hello to their dog before they go down the aisle. And some of the dogs even deliver rings down the aisle, which should probably...
Is that stressful for you? Is that stressful? They're the kind of ring bearers. And do you walk them down? Do they walk themselves? Do they go off in different directions? What happens?
Usually, I always say to them to get a member of the family on standby if the dog kind of goes off track and doesn't head down the aisle. So someone has a lead on hand and they can take the dog down. Some of the time, a lot of the wedding guests have treats to try and urge the dog down the aisle. So, no, all the ones I've done so far have went well, and that's where I'm on hand. If anything goes wrong, I can kind of step in, or if the dog isn't cooperating on the day.
Be honest, Rebecca. I know you've got a service to punt here, but there must have been times when things have gone wrong. Tell us your horror stories. We want to hear them.
To be honest, I've been very lucky. I kind of gauge the dog how they are on the day. if I can tell that the dog is not going to do well in the wedding environment or they're too nervous, I kind of say to the couple, look, we'll go to the gardens, have a couple of photos privately. I don't think the dog's really ready to face the wedding scene just of yet. So there's definitely ways around it. But I feel like, you know, could be a disaster coming, but I'm going to do everything that I can to prevent
do they
that.
sometimes get a bit overwhelmed by, I mean, I find weddings quite overwhelming sometimes. I mean, do they ever get a bit overwhelmed by all the people and they, you know, they pet them coming into the church and all the rest of it? I mean,
Yeah.
or the wedding venue. Do they ever sort of just kind of go a bit, lose it a bit slightly?
No, so it does depend, but a lot of, like, the dog knows most of the guests there.
Yep.
So half of the time it's the dog taking me over to meet the granny and granda or family members. So they know quite a lot of the guests that are arriving, which is great. But no, of course it can be a little bit overwhelming for them if there's big crowds, but that's where we can kind of step in and take them away and take them on a walk and give them plenty of breaks so that it's not stressful for them.
Are you married yourself? Have you had a dog be a ring bearer for you?
No, I am not married. You know, I don't think my dog would be one to go to a wedding. So she is quite a nervous dog, and
Right,
she is a little bit crazy. So I'm not sure if that would go down well. So certainly there are dogs.
One of the best types of dog. One of the best types of dog. I mean, obviously the best breed of dog is rescue, as we know. Hashtag
Yes,
adopt, don't shop. Excellent. Glad to hear you're a rescue person like me. But I mean, are there the small yappy dogs? Are they less well behaved than the big stupid dogs?
I mean, it is kind of a stigma, isn't it? Like the small yappy dogs.
I was once called the lolloping Labrador of British politics, Rebecca.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, that is one dog. I always say a trusty Labrador. Every Labrador that I have taken, they've been very good. So they have. So when people say that they have a Labrador and if they're coming to stay at my house as well, if it's a Labrador, I'm always very happy because I kind of say, you know, Labrador is a trusty Labrador and you can kind of count on them.
Excellent. That's great stuff. And in terms of you apparently only book in one family dog at a time. You can't spread yourself too thinly in this regard.
Yeah, so with the weddings, obviously it's only the one family at a time, but when it comes to my pet sitting, the home from home, a lot of people, maybe if they have a dog that is reactive or is nervous and can't be around other dogs, that's where I kind of step in. And if they're going away on holiday and things and they're worrying about the reactive dog that they have, where are we going to put it? It won't cope well in kennels. And a lot of home from homes maybe have like 5 or 6 dogs at a time. That's kind of where I can step in and they can come to me and they've all the home comforts up on the sofa, things like that. And it's one-to-one care, so it's just that little bit of extra attention for them.
Rebecca, thank you very much indeed. That's Rebecca McBride. Oh, also, sorry, just before you go, I mean, were you sort of destined to do this, to work with brides with the surname? I actually have, my brother's partner's surname is McBride as well.
Oh, really?
And yeah, I don't know if she's related to you, but Northern Ireland's a small place. And I just wonder, I mean, McBride and Groom, that's inspired.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of destined, isn't it? Even when I was thinking of the name, it didn't come to me at the beginning, which is so silly, but it was almost like a light bulb moment, and I was like, right, I have to do this now.
Yes, absolutely. There's nothing else that could be done. Rebecca, thank you very much indeed. That's Rebecca McBride there, McBride and Groom. She's a dog wedding chaperone.